trolling Senator Elizabeth Warren as a snake, and in post after post, labeling Mayor Pete Buttigieg a rat. Two victims of this tell CNN they were so afraid of the online attacks they faced, they don't even want us to describe the circumstances for fear it would start up again. They both just questioned the politics of Bernie Sanders in a public setting, and their personal lives were exposed and attacked.
Well, just what Nick said, I think that's right. I mean, there is no Democratic establishment anymore. There's not even a Democratic Party anymore. The Democratic Party is a meaningless notion that the party, like the Republican Party, has been hollowed out and privatized to a large extent. There are Democratic elites, and so when we're talking about the Democratic establishment, we're really talking about a number of, a bunch of people that Nick also does well, which really means Democratic donors.
This is the most important election in the history of our country.
This election is the most important in the modern history of this country.
The election in 2020, without hyperbole, is going to be the most important election this country has undergone in over 100 years. Not a joke.
This November's elections are more important than any I can remember in my lifetime, and that includes when I was on the ballot.
There are just 8 days left in what is the most important election of our lifetime.
Where did you guys come to a conclusion about why Clinton had such a hard time just owning that she did something wrong with the email server?
You know, I know that Russia and other forces would love us to have a debate. This is exactly what they want. They want us to have a debate about the internal structure of Hillary's campaign, what's true, what's not true. And I'm just not going to play that. I'm sorry.
Yes, we came, we saw, we died.
I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It's like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
You know, people have said, if you look at, for example, the heat that ended up around the bend the knee, Colin Kaepernick. Mm-hmm. Many smart people have said it actually was not a thing. The Russian bots started taking out. Yes.
But I saw my mom. My mom is the strongest woman I know.
She should be running.
It's not about.
If you're like me, one of the millions suffering from pain caused by migraine, Nurtec ODT may help. It's the only medication that can treat a migraine when it strikes and prevent migraine attacks.
Trump and the Republicans lose on Tuesday, and if they lose badly, it's not going to be because of the left, whatever that means. It's not because of the 50 Antifa black mask guys who roam around the United States breaking windows and committing mayhem, most of whom are probably paid police informers.
Most of whom are probably paid police informers.
Rudy Giuliani, there's only three things he mentioned in a sentence, a noun and a verb and 9/11. I mean...
I'm going to try to get through this. Thank you for what you did 3 years ago today.
And I went to Wall Street in December of 2007, before the big crash that we had, and I basically said, cut it out.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. If we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden.
This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever.
He is sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
I can't do it.
We'll do it live.
Okay.
We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. And thing sucks.
In 5, 4, 3.
Citizens of the internet, StreamYard really fucking pisses me off because it used to do this thing where when you're in that view and you were trying to share something, it would pull you out of that if you had nothing on the stage to share, but it doesn't do that anymore. So that's why I just jumped on and looking like an asshole because StreamYard does that. Anyway, citizens of the internet, great to be back for another episode of the Politics Show. Thank you very much, all of you, for tuning in. There's a lot to talk about. It actually, I have to say, too, it was kind of a slow news week, if I'm being honest. There wasn't a lot of crazy stuff, like just in comparison to how things have been for the last couple of years. It was sort of slow, but I feel like a lot of old stories are kind of becoming new stories. You know, like the Ukrainistan proxy war, as I like to call it. That's a story that it's an old story that's become new because there's some new developments happening that we're going to go way into today. And it seems like the general theme to me, as someone who doesn't really pay much attention to mainstream press, and when I do, I'm kind of shocked by what I see when I tune in to CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or any of those channels that are just constant fucking propaganda outlets. Let me turn this mic a little bit better. So the big news this week, the big story was an incident that relates back to our favorite war, the war in Afghanistan. The good war, as the Obama people called it. So interesting. There was recently an Afghani serviceman who shot some people in DC. And I say Afghani serviceman because he was working for the United States, apparently, and he killed some National Guardsmen. And whenever this kind of stuff happens, the immediate reaction by most thinking people is this is some kind of an op. And there's a lot of good reason behind that response when you look at the last several years of what's been going on in the United States and just in general. It's funny, at Thanksgiving, I was telling some of my relatives that I was excited to watch football because I wanted to find out what they were saying on the Mockingbird networks. And by the Mockingbird networks, I mean the networks that are literally fed through Operation Mockingbird by the intelligence community, CIA, et cetera. And that kind of got me on this whole side rail about how the way that the world works now is through networks, you know, and it used to be that the Mockingbird networks, the controlled mainstream media channels that were available to most of the public, those networks were very limited in where they would allow the dialogue to go. And now we have a lot of new networks. So we have the internet, which is just basically a collection of smaller networks. It's one big network that breaks down into several other networks. So the Mockingbird network now, as I like to call it, that's my new lexicon term for the corporate media or the mainstream media, the Mockingbird network, just so you know. But the Mockingbird networks have been fomenting narratives and, you know, leading the public in the way that we are supposed to be led for a long time. And with the advent of the internet, I think they thought they were going to be able to control that network. And the pandemic was a great example of that. I think really when you look back at what that was, it was really a trial run on like, hey, can we really control the public dialogue even with the internet? And the answer is no, they could not. They tried valiantly, but as Dave Smith said at one point, once the internet happened, it's almost like there's a giant wave coming on shore, and like the people trying to stop the spread of information, or as they like to refer to it, without any merit, disinformation. That's just what they call information that, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of departs from or splits with the mainstream narrative. I had like a brain, like what's the best word to use there? It's like, anyway, I'm not going to go into an English thing, but that is really where we're at now with everything and the way that media works. And I guess what Dave Smith was saying to complete that thought was the people trying to stop this new wave of information are like someone standing on a beach with their hand out. Yeah, they'll stop a little bit of the water, but it's so massive at this point, it's unstoppable. And I've made this point with, social media like TikTok, for example, or Facebook. It's like once those platforms become ultra censorious, the public will just move to a new one. And you'll play whack-a-mole for eternity with that. You'll never stop the spread of, the truth among people now, especially with the way that communication is. It will always find a way around. It's like the vines that grow around your fence or whatever. Like it always finds a way around. It's always gonna prevail. So a lot of people with this DC shooting right off the bat started in with the conspiracy theories like this was some kind of false flag. And so one of the first people that I saw with coming with this is your boy Ryan Knight, proud socialist. Turn this a little bit. And Ryan says National Guard shooting suspect was an Afghan national who worked for the CIA and served alongside U.S. Special Forces in Afghanistan. Now, when you factor in that Trump used the shooting to deploy 500 more National Guard, it's not hard to see why people are suspecting a false flag. You have to wonder too when this kind of stuff happens, like the people that get killed. Maybe that's part of it. It's like two birds with one stone. Like maybe that person was dissenting within the ranks or something, or maybe they were a whistleblower, or they were on to something. They shouldn't be like, oh, well, this guy just went crazy and killed these people. But again, this level of skepticism is warranted when you consider the past, 10 years, 5 years even, right? No one believes anything they see or takes anything at face value, and rightfully so. So anyway, that's the story so far. And I've said this before, but it does seem like the control narrative shifted from, white supremacists being the threat to like trans activists. And whenever they need some kind of a manufactured, outrage towards a certain group, something like this tends to happen, or at least an event like this. I mean, I'm sure these types of events happen so often at this point, we're numb to it, but it does seem like something like this, it was a couple people gets like hyper focused on, and then the press, runs with it. And if you think about it, the Ukrainistan thing started as we drew down in Afghanistan. So with this, my first thought was, oh, it's an Afghani guy. Maybe this is designed as a backdrop for another foray into Afghanistan. Like, well, and I think it was Danny Haiphong or someone it might have been Scott Ritter or McGregor. One of the shows I had, they mentioned briefly, they touched on this about how Bagram Air Force Base, the U.S. wants that because it's a very strategically located base, in the middle of these trade routes through Asia, through the East. So it's a direct route to China. It gives the U.S. like direct, as we ramp up tensions against China for God knows why. Well, we all know why. defense contractors. So anyway, the narrative shifted from white supremacists to this. So the other interesting, kind of piece of info here is this reality that people like Laura Loomer for a while have been saying there's going to be an attack. There's going to be like a 9/11 style attack. So this is from Gen X Girl, just retweeting this other guy, but she says any normal person who posted this many times about knowing another 9/11 was coming would be arrested and interrogated by now. It's weird. And so this guy, Sam Parker, has kind of, done a collage of all the times Laura Loomer's out here tweeting, there's another 9/11 style attack coming soon, and Muslims are the ones to watch. And, so just to continue going with this too, all the mainstream press outlets are verifying that this guy had CIA ties. So this is New York Times. Thanks, Kareem. Breaking news, the suspect in the shooting of the 2 National Guard members in Washington, D.C. had worked with CIA-backed units during the war in Afghanistan, officials said. And Kareem says, oh, shocker. Of course, we're so shocked. And just to top you off with a little bit of NPR here, Ben Norton says the man who allegedly shot 2 National Guard members in Washington, D.C. served in an elite CIA counterterrorism unit in Afghanistan. The CIA director admitted he was welcomed into the U.S. due to his prior work with the U.S. government. So another interesting piece of this here, as you can clearly see, is that the corporate media is not backing away from this CIA association. And here's a little piece of the, this is from CBS News, just so you get an idea of who this guy is here. And I didn't really clip the full article. I just wanted to have a picture of the guy because he's clearly, Muslim name. Suspect entered the U.S. 4 years ago. Laconwall, 29, entered the U.S. in 2021, multiple law enforcement sources told CBS News on Wednesday. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem said on X that the suspect was paroled into the U.S. on September 8th, 2021, under a Biden-era program for Afghan nationals called Operation Allies Welcome. The suspect and his family fled Taliban threats in Afghanistan's Coast Province and relocated to Kabul before being transferred to the United States. Multiple U.S. officials told CBS News. So interesting to note that CBS News is now also helmed by Barry Weiss. And you can almost kind of tell in the tone of their article here that she has, it kind of, from just the tone of that article, what I got from it is they brought her in from more of an operational standpoint. You can see she's quoting X there. She's a little bit more, not deferential to the Trump administration, but, kind of, and obviously Barry Weiss didn't write that piece. I'm not claiming that, but I think she's at the top of CBS News now, and you're going to see everything. Every time I see CBS News now, that goes through my head. Like, oh, the Barry Weiss era of CBS News has arrived. So interestingly enough, one of the better takes I saw on this in right-wing media this weekend, and the weekend just started, so really this week, was from Nick Fuentes. And I think he does a really solid job here of underlining why this isn't a typical radicalized Muslim terrorist incident. The guy was clearly, pro-American for the most part until recently. So it's curious what would motivate a guy like this to do something like this. And watch this really quick and we'll talk about it.
Story, I'm sure you've heard about it. There was a terrorist attack in Washington, D.C. An Afghan national targeted, ambushed, and shot 2 National Guardsmen about a mile away from the White House. He was identified as a 29-year-old, basically an Afghan refugee. They claim he shouted Allahu Akbar when he did the shooting. And this is a story from the New York Times. It says, quote, The suspect, accused of critically wounding 2 National Guard members in a shooting near the White House, entered the country in 2021 through a refugee program for people fleeing from Afghanistan. Local officials said the suspect, who was injured after opening fire in a busy tourist area, appeared to have acted alone, targeting members of the West Virginia National Guard. The suspect was identified as Ramanullah Lakanwal, age 29.
So when they say that he targeted members of the West Virginia National Guard, is that because he specifically targeted members of the West Virginia National Guard, or was that just who happened to be in D.C. at the time? They brought in members of the West Virginia National Guard. I'm assuming it's the latter, but
he came to the United States through a program known as Operation Allies Welcome, which provided entry to Afghan nationals fleeing the Taliban takeover of their country after the withdrawal of U.S. troops under President Joe Biden. President Trump in Florida on Wednesday said on social media that the gunman would pay a very steep price. He also ordered a deployment of 500 additional troops to Washington to supplement the more than 2,000 already on the ground. Also said we need to review everybody that's here on a visa, if that's worth anything. Now, about this story, it's like I said.
Okay, so there we go. That little tidbit right there also said it's worth reviewing visas. That could possibly be the motive for a psyop of this nature. Oh, look, like we let all these people in, and now we got to check the visas because some of them could be radicalized and maybe we should reconsider. Now, I think in the case of a guy like this, he deserves to be here. He worked for the United States, and I'll let Nick finish because Nick kind of touches on this and he probably explains it a lot better than I will.
Top of the show. So this 29-year-old Afghan shoots 2 National Guardsmen, and people are going to read the name, which is Ramanullah Lakanwal, and they're going to hear the national origin, Afghanistan. They're going to hear about how he arrived here, ostensibly as a refugee, apparently. And everyone's going to draw some conclusions about who this guy is. They're going to say this is a fanatical Muslim from a Muslim country that we went to war with. We went to war, we bombed them, we engendered hatred, then we brought them here. They hate us, and now they're killing us. He was motivated by his radical, fanatical religion, ideology. He shouted Allahu Akbar, killed Americans, and what we see is what we get. And that's one way to look at it. Maybe that's the case, because all that is true. He is effectively a refugee from Afghanistan, probably is a fanatical Muslim, or could be.
The thing I think is interesting about situations like this, as a sidebar here, and you'll notice this, there's never a self-reflection or a thought of self-reflection in a situation like this. We never go, the media, the press, the collective, chatterbox never goes, what did we do to cause this incident? It's always like, oh, it's a Muslim terrorist. It's a this or that. The blame is always external. You'll know this. There's never anyone that stands up and goes, okay, well, how did we create a situation where this guy, obviously broke, who was pro-American, who worked with the U.S. military, his brain broke to the point where he's going to kill, his fellow soldiers. Apparently, he worked in the military. There's never that question. How are we responsible for this? And that's one of the reasons that people like Trump rose to prominence. And one of the reasons that a person like Ron Paul was getting rounds of applause in the Republican primaries, back in 2012, because he was one of the few people who went like, hey, 9/11 is our fault. We do a lot of shit. You want to sit there and go, oh, they hate us for our freedom. No, they hate us for being in their countries and murdering their wives and children and family members, whether it's intentional or not. There's a lot of collateral damage associated with these military operations. So anyway, in a case like this, of course, you're not going to see anyone in the press, the corporate press, go, how did the U.S. create a situation where a guy like this lost his mind and turned on us?
It's plausible. He shot these Americans. They claim he yelled Allahu Akbar. So maybe he hates America. Maybe he hates what America is doing with Israel and Gaza. Maybe he hates what America did in Afghanistan.
He yelled Allahu Akbar. That is Muslim, that's like Islamophobia shit right there. Like, you never hear them go, oh, the white supremacist yelled Heil Hitler or whatever before he shot a bunch of people. Maybe you do. But it seems like the propaganda behind this, going back to Laura Loomer's tweet about how there's going to be another 9/11, the propaganda on this is already very like, oh, we need to go back into Afghanistan. Oh, the Muslims, see, those Muslims, we told you it was going to be like this. And after you saw the expose that Tucker did recently on the Trump assassin, the Thomas Michael Crooks guy, how can and then the Charlie Kirk thing, you pile these things one on top of the other, and something like this comes along, and of course the instant reaction from any person with even half of a fucking brain is to go, this seems a little odd.
Who knows? Maybe it's PTSD. Maybe he, because he was a fighter or was involved with American forces in some way, maybe it's like PTSD. Who knows? But we have to understand exactly what this is. And a lot of people don't know that when the United States conducted its operation in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, we recruited support from the locals, the local tribes, militias, soldiers. We recruited the locals to help in many different capacities as we were fighting the conflict, as security forces, military forces, as translators, in a number of different roles. And this is why he was brought to America under the program. It's called Allies Welcome. Why is it called Allies Welcome? Because these are not just any refugees. These are not women and children. These are
refugees who go into an American military base in here.
What's your name, scumbag?
Not fleeing refugees, not strictly speaking. Allies Welcome. These are collaborators. These are collaborationists. These are not Afghans that were with the Taliban or ISIS-K. These are Afghans who were working with the United States military and special forces, and probably working with them for many years, and living with them and working with them and ostensibly supporting the goals of the American occupation. That's how we got here. Allies Welcome. In 2021, when the Taliban retook control over the country, of course, everybody that was collaborating with the United States is going to be killed. The United States is fighting the Taliban for 20 years. We took power from them. We controlled Afghanistan. When we left, the Taliban filled a void. And actually, we beat a retreat. We were being defeated by the Taliban effectively. Taliban was taking over anyway. We could not maintain control of the country from a distance or indefinitely.
Sounds very familiar to another military situation we have. Any guesses on what one that is?
So everybody working with the United States was going to be probably captured and imprisoned or killed by the Taliban. So we brought all of our collaborators back to the United States because we owe them. We owe these people.
And he's right. These people were in danger. And the other point he brings up, that again, it's like, this guy wasn't a radical Islamist. This guy worked on bases with American military for a long time before this happened. So again, the whole thing is very suspicious. And it's good to hear conservative voices providing this type of context around these types of stories, because a lot of the context he's providing there is the type of shit that a Ron Paul libertarian would provide, or someone who's anti-war left. And if you remember, Ron Paul was one of the few guys in the 2012 Republican era who was honest about blowback and how terrorists don't hate us for our freedom. They hate us because we're in their countries, taking their resources and murdering their families.
Like we owe the Israelis, like we owe the Kurds, like we owe the Ukrainians. We owe these people in Afghanistan, so they say. So we bring this guy over under Operation Allies Welcome. And again, is this guy a fanatical Muslim? It would seem not. on the basis of how he came here. He didn't come here as a refugee. He came here basically as a U.S. mercenary. Big difference.
Big difference. Big difference. Oh, how did that get in there? How did that get in there? That got in there because one of the things I've been doing lately is, this is a totally unrelated slide, but I've been taken to photoshopping Tyler Robinson's photo onto Patsy Cline album covers. And I can't explain it. It's just something deep inside of me. It's a artistic passion of mine now. Maybe it's the spirit or the voice of God. I can't explain it. I just listen to the voices. So moving on. There's another one. So we're going to talk about something now, ethics, honesty, and integrity. Something that our mainstream press has been lacking for a very long time. And it's kind of the reason for their downfall. So I happened to catch this episode of a popular podcast with a guest, one Adam Carolla. And in the course of the conversation that was being had here, they kind of start with, the great pandemic of 2021, where literally billions died. Billions and billions of people died during the great pandemic of 2021. You and me, ain't that America? And so I've been a longtime fan of Adam, going back to Loveline, which was a great show for a kid my age. Just kind of, Adam was like the guy, the angry dad who just dropped truth bombs on kids that would call for sex advice. I remember him at one point telling this like really dumb sounding caller, whatever you do, don't reproduce. Okay. He's clearly joking, but the truth is said in jest. And I've always kind of seen him as a positive influence in that regard. So I'm going to play some of this and let's talk about it. This is kind of a long clip, so I might jump around a little bit. But it's worth a look for a few different reasons. So, and we're going to get into those right now.
It wasn't what they said it was, and that was what the problem was. But when they found a healthy person who takes care of himself, got over it really quickly with these medications, they had to figure out, they turned my face yellow.
I know, but here's my whole thing. Why would you mortgage your integrity? Why would you play so fast and loose with the only thing you really need to own? Like, it's really all you got in terms of, my house could have burned down in Malibu, but I can get a new house, and my Paul Newman race car I could crash in total, but I can get a new one. But when your reputation goes, that's it.
Exactly.
That's all you got.
Yeah. Especially when it's a provable, easily provable
so
lie.
Why were they so fast and loose? Like, why was Sanjay Gupta up there talking about horse paste when he knew better, when it is now so damaging to their reputation? Like, if somebody said to me, hey, Rolling Stone magazine, I'd go, fuck off. I'm not going to listen to any of those people. Sanjay Gupta recommends, I'd be like, that asshole, all he does is lie. And I'm not going to, maybe he's right. By the way, maybe he's not lying about this thing.
Right.
I'm just saying I'm not going to listen to him and many other people because of this.
Yeah. I love the term he used too, mortgage their integrity, kind of, because it's the difference between a Chris Cuomo and a Joe Rogan is a Joe Rogan also makes mistakes, but he comes out and says, hey, I was wrong about this and here's why. Where the reason, again, in the last election cycle, I think that Trump won, I looked at it as a referendum on the media because the media spent the entire election cycle just fear-mongering about how, it was the second coming of the Nazis. And now, some would argue that it is. If you look at the media and the things that are going on in the press now, they're like, oh, see, we told you ICE is attacking everybody and everybody's going to jail and blah, 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 blah. And there's some faggot outside my door with a leaf blower right now. But that itself is propaganda, as we know, a lot of it. And I'm not saying that Trump isn't doing anything bad or like it's all flowers and roses. I would never say that. But I also think there's a clear and present narrative being woven to subvert attempts to change the status quo. And we're going to get into this much deeper with the Ukraine war in just a minute. But let's go back to Adam and Joe for a minute.
don't get why you would do that. I mean, for him to say horse pace, well, it can be used on a horse. It's like,
I don't think Sanjay said that, but most of them did.
He, what he did is he went back onto like Anderson Cooper's show.
Don Lemon.
Or Don Lemon,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah. To me, they're almost the same guy. They love lying and cock. Those are their things. You're right. They're different. They're different. So he went on, Don
And there's nothing wrong with that, but that is kind of funny. They are similar.
Lemon, and Don Lemon is going, but it can be used on a horse. He's like, well, it can't. I mean, he really should have used that moment to clarify a little bit, but he just sort of passively went along with Don Lemon.
And see, this is where I'll probably skip past a lot of this, because what you see here is Joe Rogan being diplomatic and attempting to defend Don Lemon and Sanjay Gupta because he likes them as people. And he's actually sat down and talked with them, at least maybe not Don Lemon, but at least I know he has with Sanjay Gupta. And so he's kind of making excuses for them. But the point Adam's making is a good one, is that these people also had another opportunity after they were proven wrong to be bold enough to go, hey, you know what? I was wrong about this. Here's why I was wrong. And to Chris Cuomo's credit, say that 5 times fast. Chris Cuomo credit. To Chris Cuomo's credit, he actually, half-assed came around and admitted he was wrong to some degree, but he still tried to. And this is the point that I think Adams that's making is a good one. Is like these people, Anyway, let me let them finish because they.
I think it's more of a just not being a very brave person and being confronted and not being very easy. Well, also, it was like, I think one of the first times he'd ever been attacked. He got attacked publicly and he got attacked publicly even more after that. And I actually made a post about it. Just like, he's a good guy. He's a part of a system. I don't think Sanjay's a bad guy at all. I like talking to him. I think he's a very nice guy.
I agree. And I feel that way about
the problem with these people too is I don't think they're bad people either. I think the difference between them and someone like me, for example, is they think that they're better, that their views are superior. And so that as a result of that, it's okay for them to lie because they're doing it for the good of humanity, and that's definitely a recurring theme with the American government and the deep state and all those people. It's okay for us to fucking be scumbags and liars and kill and rape and lie and do all this stuff because we're doing it for the greater good, and with these situations, like in the Middle East, for example, the entire basis of your argument that it's okay for us to, slaughter these people and take their land or whatever is going on, however you want to look at it, is that they're savages and we're better than them. And so when you start doing the things that you're claiming that savages do, you lose your entire basis for your argument. You don't have the high ground anymore. You're just as bad as the evil you're claiming to fight. And I think that's the problem with the mainstream media to some there is it's like these people think that they're doing, they believe in their heart of hearts that they're doing the right thing by lying to you about, the pandemic, for example.
Most people who were involved with this, most, not all, but still being a good guy, but sort of peddling misinformation that you know enough, what the truth is.
I think many of them don't. This is a problem with medicine. Like, say, if I believe Sanjay is a neurosurgeon. Is that correct?
Yeah. So he jumps into Sanjay
can't stop me from telling the truth. This is mortgaging your integrity is the perfect way to describe it. Because what a stupid thing to do for the whole network. I wouldn't care if it's the pharmaceutical drug companies or whoever. If I was the head of that network and someone said we're going to just lie about someone and we're going to call a universally accepted effective medicine We're going to call it horse dewormer, something that's in the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines.
Yes.
The guy who created it won a Nobel Prize. We're going to call that horse dewormer, and we're just going to say that it's killing people, and then we're going to just run with it. I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? We have to stay. CNN has to be here in 2030. CNN's got to be here in 2040.
Yes.
If we kill the reputation in 2020, you're going to fuck it up for the future. This is not worth doing.
Well, they definitely, and by the way, they came.
So that's really a capitalist mindset too. And I probably spoke about this before, but I always think about this. I worked for this company and the CEO is a tech company. The CEO was an older Irish dude, old school guy. He was the kind of guy who was out on the floor shaking hands with the, day-to-day employees, the accountants and the people on the phones and stuff, because he understood that the value of the company is based on its people. And I remember listening to him talk during the 2008 financial crash, and he said something that stuck with me so hard. He's like, the business model in American capitalism is unsustainable. Like it's impossible to show growth in a company quarter over quarter unless you are doing something illegal. Because at the time, I think the Enron stuff and all the financial shit had blown up with, Enron was long past, but the Bear Stearns had just gone under and all these like financial institutions were failing because they were pulling strings and stuff. And he was making a broader statement about how the system kind of sets them up for that, like you get rewarded for pulling these little accounting tricks and doing all this stuff. And I think the dynamic is similar in this world. So
right off of Russian collusion of like 4 years of that.
Exactly.
Right into COVID. Like they were just wrong about everything. But you're right. They got used to it.
And what's wild is a lot of people still live in that same bubble today, despite everything else that's happened. To a lot of people's credit, they've come out.
They got kind of complacent, and I don't think they anticipated what you're talking about, the sort of alternative media and podcasters and just voices coming from other places.
And also those voices being united. Like you were saying things that I was saying, that Glenn Greenwald was saying, that Matt Taibbi was saying. It was like all these different podcasts were all saying, this is horse shit.
Right.
And honestly, too, I have to point out stuff like this, but putting Jay Bhattacharya in the Trump administration was a huge deal to me. I see Jay Bhattacharya now recently on Twitter. I didn't clip his tweet, but he said something about how the New York Times was questioning whether or not he would enforce lockdowns if there was another pandemic. And he's like, of course I wouldn't. There's evidence that they didn't do any good, and you have to applaud that. You have to applaud, while the Trump administration, I don't think is great, they are doing stuff like that. So let's applaud them for that. Anyway.
That voice of this is horseshit was enormous in comparison to CNN.
Right. Yep. But it's always, it's what happens to all sort of old guard companies, or many. I mean, it can be media, but could also just be automotive manufacturers. Like the big three were so big and so dominant for so long in this country that when Toyota and Datsun started showing up in 1969, they're like, get out of here. Just going to try that little pop gun. No one wants that crap. Come on, man. We make land yachts, and they didn't start changing.
Right.
It took them a long time because they were like, we're Ford, we're Chrysler, we're GM, we're huge. We do it.
That's what those 70s cars too, where we always called them boats.
We sell cars to the world and they want our product. And nobody, I mean, it happens countlessly, like in business, like somebody needs to sound the alarm, but no one says anything and they just sail off. And at some point their market share drops, below 20% or whatever. And now it's time for a huge correction. Right. And I'm guessing.
So one thing I will say here, one area that I think he's a little bit wrong is I think this dynamic kind of already happened in the media in the 2010s. And what subtly happened is a lot of these media companies started being propped up by the government through NGOs and grants. And I've talked about this a ton. And if you watch Jimmy Dore or any of the popular podcasts, Matt Taibbi went into the weeds a lot on this. That's the problem. Like someone like Stephen Colbert, these networks, they're getting low-key funded through the government. So for them, that's also a way of editorial control. That's why and so the point I'm making here is Adam's making this about business, and it is that to some degree, but it's also more nefarious than that because these media outlets are funded by the government. And it's the same dynamic when I worked heavily in advertising before all that legislation kind of came about and all, the Smith Modernization Act and all that said that you could propagandize Americans. Even before that, the control was there through money, through ad money with pharma companies and weapons contractors and that kind of stuff. That's how they control these media outlets. And those media outlets are also gate kept so that voices like a Nick Fuentes or a Candace Owens or a Tucker Carlson, like once they start breaking through, they get thrown to the side. Tucker Carlson, great example, had the #1 show on Fox and was canceled and thrown out because he said things that the establishment didn't want him saying to a massive audience. And just like Star Wars, strike me down, I'll become much more powerful than you could ever imagine. Look at what happened to Tucker. Look at what happened to Candace. Same dynamic with Candace under Ben Shapiro, where she started having conversations that they were like, nope, you can't do that. So I do think there is a nefarious aspect to it that Adam's kind of glossing over by blaming it all on business.
Legacy media is going through that. They're basically going through what the big three auto manufacturers went through in the early 80s. Like, we need to make a more reliable, smaller car that's more fuel efficient. Yeah, they were Toyota, Nissan, Datsun, whatever. They were way down the road on that, making those cars before Ford and Chrysler and GM and whatever started to begin to think about that.
Right.
So it's like an aircraft carrier. It takes a long time to turn around. And these media companies, at least like traditional legacy stuff, are realizing we got to write the shit.
So they talk, I think.
Well, it's going to take these
Barry Weiss
way the fuck off because now it's intentional. Whereas in the past, they're just inaccurate, But it is kind of sobering to read stuff about yourself. And it's always like, oh, they got it wrong.
Well, when someone's doing something like that on purpose, that's evil. That's an evil person.
So before this, they were talking about how they put Barry Weiss in to try and save CBS, which I said this at the time. Buying Paramount is like buying the Titanic. You're buying a sinking, dying organization. And it's like, I'm sure Larry Ellison, very pro a certain country in the Middle East, bought Paramount and installed Barry Weiss in CBS, which is under Paramount, to, again, try and control this narrative. But like I said earlier, it's going to be whack-a-mole. As soon as you tamp down on that source of information, a new one will pop up that's uncensored, and people will migrate there. You see it with Rumble. A guy like Nick Fuentes has more than 500,000 viewers on Rumble. Someone like Jimmy Dore draws people to Rumble because, he knows that he can't say everything he wants to say on YouTube. So I don't think that buying Paramount and attempting to gatekeep it even further was a good business decision, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm willing to admit in a couple years, if Paramount's this blossoming, amazing thing, I'll eat crow, I guess.
And that's a giant chunk of that business. A giant chunk of that business is purposely misrepresenting people because that's going to make for a more salacious story, or that's going to push the narrative that you're trying to push. And this BBC thing that they did with Trump, I'm sure you watched that. Like, that's a perfect example of that. They felt justified in editing something to make it look like he had a completely different sentence.
Well, the funny thing about it is whenever they confront the outgoing head who's on...
So anyway, they go into a little bit about the BBC there and how you can't really trust media. But I think Adam made a great correlation there between the auto companies and the mainstream media, where you see the same dynamic, or you saw the same dynamic in the world of music several years ago with Napster. When Napster hit, that technology completely obliterated the record label's business model. And so it took time for them to get around MP3s and to get to where we have the streaming model now, where you have labels working, to kind of control the revenue flows through streaming. And I'm sure they're doing some kind of payola there where they're pushing the artists that they're pushing, with the budgets behind them. And now I just read this recently, you have AI, these record labels are buying or partnering with AI companies to basically, monetize that stream, where it's like, now if you want to say, oh, I want to do a rap song in the style of Led Zeppelin or whatever, if Led Zeppelin's one of the licensed artists, you can make AI songs that have the sound of Led Zeppelin, basically. So the record industry has kind of glommed onto a lot of this stuff. But again, I see the trends kind of going against all that, because even with AI music, there's already a backlash to AI music. And it's crazy. If you've seen the charts lately, there hasn't even been like rap songs popping on the charts lately. It's kind of going back to a more organic singer-songwriter, rock and roll, music that breathes versus music that has had the life produced out of it. And there's a lot of talk about that. And I could go on a whole sidebar about that because I'm a music guy. But I just think that the point that Adam's making here is good in the sense that it is truly what's happening, and you see it happening in Hollywood now and corporate news. What happened kind of to the record industry already. So and I said this before, the reason the last election went the way it did is because of this dynamic. No one trusts the corporate news anymore, especially after the COVID debacle, and that's a reason that a huge portion of the country really doesn't have those views. And what's crazy is, despite the stuff around COVID, I still see people in the streets wearing masks, like outside and stuff, like it matters. It's ridiculous and kind of scary how easily people were whipped into a frenzy by that, because the new media, people think that it's more real because it's social media or anything, but it's even more tailored to you, and it's even more emotionally gravitating. I noticed this with, the ICE raid stuff. Like, there's all this propaganda being pushed, and I'm not going to say it's not real. Again, I'm sure some of it is real, but there's a lot of like these videos that get pushed out that it's like, oh, look at what this person is doing to this person. It's like, okay, is that even real? That like everything could be AI'd now. So you could take a footage from several years ago and put it in a modern backdrop, or there's so many things that can be done now. You just have to approach every media source, whether it's internet or not, with a skeptical eye. So, and these guys, to some here, I think really nailed it with the line about mortgaging their integrity, because that's what these mainstream media outlets did. No one trusts them anymore. No one listens to them. So moving on, there's a massive split underway in the GOP right now. And we've seen this dynamic across the board with both parties. We've seen it with the Democrats. You see it with the Zoran Mamdani, the rising kind of populist wing of the Democratic Party, versus the established elite party, old hats, the Chuck Schumers and the Nancy Pelosi's versus, and you saw it with AOC. When AOC got in there, they quickly flipped her to a stock and trade Democrat, got her on the cover of Vogue and did all this stuff, and got her at the Met Gala. And then it's like, okay, now she's going to play ball and be a stock and trade Democrat. Well, the same dynamic happened with Marjorie Taylor Greene. But instead of, kind of taking the shit and being forced to model herself into the party, she's resigning, which is sad. And we talked about this last week with even people like anti-war voices like Medea Benjamin from Code Pink are like, no, Marjorie Taylor Greene, we need you. Even though I disagree with you on trans issues or whatever, that is the future right there. You can disagree with someone on a specific issue, but why not work together on the stuff that you do agree on? We have to get out of that stupid right versus left paradigm. And so what's going on right now in the GOP is this split between the established order, the Ted Cruz, the, Mitch McConnells, the Lindsey Grahams, and the establishment is losing this battle. And like I said, this dynamic has been occurring on the Democratic side, but the difference is the MAGA people are fighting, whereas the Bernie Sanders people, for the most part, not including people like myself and Nick Cruz and Jimmy Dore, the quote unquote left allowed themselves to sacrifice their principles and be absorbed into the corporate Democratic Party, which is why you have the AOCs and the Ilhan Omars, who still sometimes do some good stuff, but overall are pretty much part of the corrupt party machinery now. On the other side, though, these MAGA people are like, no, fuck you. We're not playing ball with this. And they're much more belligerent about it, which I think is good. We needed insurgents into our political establishment with the balls to actually fight, you know? And a lot of people say, well, Marjorie Taylor Greene's backing down now. What can she really do as one congressperson? You know, I listening to her talk, I'm like, I guarantee you, I said this last week, I guarantee you there's been violent threats against her and her family. Are you, and when you stand in the face of that as one person, one member of Congress, what do? Would you be able to handle it? I mean, I can't say that I would. You know, Trump has been shot at, and you know, even if you don't agree with him 100% of the time, I think about Bernie Sanders all the time, because he had a movement behind him and he didn't fight to get anything. And watching this dynamic unfold on the right now, I understand a little bit more why, because the deck is so stacked against anyone with the balls to give a finger to special interests like a certain foreign lobby, which I won't call out by name right now. So amidst this Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, you have the voices, the most popular voices in the conservative movement, Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, also on the same page as Marjorie Taylor Greene. And then you have the angry old guys, the Mark Levins and the Ted Cruzes and the Lindsey Grahams, clinging to this crumbling facade that they have power. They have lost it. And so this is a tweet from Marjorie Taylor Greene. This recently, Mark Levin here came out and said, the Carlson litmus test. Going forward, I'll insist that every Republican who wants our votes declare if they stand with or against lunatic Tucker Carlson. And Marjorie Taylor Greene says, this and not delivering America First results will be the end of the Republican Party. And this is very exciting to me for a lot of reasons, but exciting because it's very clear where the majority sentiment lies, and it's not with the Mark Levin crowd. And so I just want to go through and show you some of the responses to this thread from, you know, prominent voices on the right here. So here's this is Owen Schroyer as our first look into this. He says, every Republican must pass my approval test. How would that be going, Mark? Never Trump 11. And so he shows how Candace said this so well. Donald Trump has joined the Never Trump movement. These people that are trying to subvert his agenda, and we're going to get a little bit more into this on the issue of Ukraine in a minute, but these people who claim to control the party, you know, they used to be Never Trumpers. They just suck ass to power wherever it is. And so I think one of the most interesting things about the Trump movement is this dynamic where you see it kind of playing out now. Trump was able to successfully kind of co-opt the Republican Party as a vehicle for, you know, his movement into power. But he's not on the same page with a lot of Republican views and stuff. It's the new Republican Party. And I saw Candace Owens recently, this is probably like 6 months ago or something, going off about Trump not being anti-abortion enough, because Trump is a Manhattan fucking liberal, basically. And, you know, he's also a realist. So he's not caught up in this kind of like same outdated mentality as a lot of these people. But now that he has power, they assume, just like a good little doggy from either side would do, once he gets into the White House and at the controls, he's going to defer to these long state, deep state people who have been there the whole time, and go along with the establishment, which he's doing in a lot of cases. However, and I keep saying this because there's a lot of people that are just willing to immediately jump up and slam dunk on people like, oh, tricked again. It's like, bro, I'm not saying you're completely wrong, but also like turning an aircraft carrier you're not going to jump right in and just change everything in the first 6 months. Like, there's a lot of fucking legwork. And you see this with the Ukraine war. There are so many moving pieces, and there are so many people trying to sabotage and prevent an end to the conflict that Trump couldn't just come in and go like, I could end this overnight. Just getting Ukraine to the table to agree with the realities on the ground in their system is almost impossible because they're making so much money, as we see. So anyway, I'm getting side railed here, but this dynamic to me is very interesting and exciting because it just shows that the split is real, and the bad people, the status quo is losing. So to keep going down this rabbit hole for you, this is Mark Rasmussen, who is a polling guy who I covered last week. Alex Jones spoke with him. He has been talking directly to the White House and saying, hey, look, this is what the general public is saying about your performance and what you can change to, to get your poll numbers up. And he's saying, I stand with Tucker Carlson, a fellow American. So then you have, this is one of my favorites right here. These memes. This guy's got the pictures of like the Israeli flag everywhere, like in Congress, and he's got Mark Levin in the Israeli hat with his arm around a MAGA guy, the dumb MAGA guy. Qatar is everywhere. Qatar controls everything. It's just such a ridiculous argument on its face. This is another meme I really dug that someone posted. The Simpsons is like, Mark Levin wrote, you guys are woke, right? What'd he say? I don't know. I think he said he's gay. Here's another great one. And these are the MAGA people responding to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mark Levin's kind of little back and forth. It was really Marjorie Taylor Greene just retweeting Mark Levin and saying, hey, buddy, you're out. But this one's great too. Trump, all of you get out. And it's got like Tucker Carlson, Thomas Massey, Elon, Marjorie Taylor Greene, except you stay. And the guy in the clown mask, Lindsey Graham. But it keeps going. Here you have Michael Flynn's son, Michael Flynn Jr., saying the quiet part out loud. The Israel First crowd is destroying MAGA because MAGA is what won the election. That's the thing that these Republicans don't understand. People aren't going to just accept you coming in and doing the status quo again. They voted against that. They voted against Ted Cruz. They voted against Jeb Bush. Jeb, please clap Bush. For this reason. So you're not going to be able to play a shell game. And it's the reason, I think the biggest reason Biden lost, if you believe he actually won in 2020, is because they totally did this. They shell gamed the left. This is what they do every time. He said a bunch of shit. Oh, I'm going to be more like Bernie Sanders. I'm going to Biden's credit, he did accomplish some things that were worthwhile. Like the student debt forgiveness was somewhat good. I don't think it was as deep and wide as it could have been or should have been, but they did do some of that. But anyway, the MAGA people aren't going to accept that, and that this is the fight you see playing out. Trump will lose handily. On the other hand, if he adjusts and actually delivers on some stuff for America, they might be able to salvage, the next election cycle. But it's interesting when you hear people like Nick Fuentes talk about the coming election cycle, like who's the hot thing on the right. There isn't anyone. Even JD Vance, most people are like tepid about JD Vance. They're like, okay, like we liked him because Trump said he's good, but it's pretty clear he's Peter Thiel's bitch. And, I don't know that the Republicans or the MAGA movement is necessarily going to rally around him. But here you have another guy, Republicans only fight for Israel. I would argue Democrats are pretty much the same. And then you have this guy responding to Mark Levin and Marjorie Taylor Greene by sharing a Max Blumenthal tweet. So this one, of course, gets the gold star in my opinion, but he says, cool, I'll insist that every Republican who wants my vote condemns your stepson for meeting with a convicted traitor at the Israeli embassy. And this is Max Blumenthal. Israeli spy Jonathan Pollard says he also met secretly with Mark Levin's stepson, David Milstein, who is Huckabee's senior aide. Pollard defends Milstein as an American patriot. And we're gonna wrap this up here with another great meme with Laura Loomer as the Saw guy. America invaded by toxic foreigners who are sworn to destroy Rome, Amalek, Edom, Europe, and of course we Americans. And then he has this picture that's got like the nice American, I think they want to, I'm not one of those people who's going to play the Christian card at all, because that's not my bag whatsoever. I respect it if that's your thing, but it's not mine. I think it's very limiting worldview in a lot of ways, and has its own levels of corruption that all religions have. And, I'm not saying it's bad or good, but I'm not a fan. But I do like the point he's making here with this meme, where it's like, this accurately summarizes the divide in the GOP. So whether you agree with the Christianity thing or not, I have to appreciate it being, leveraged as part of this debate against, the direction that things are going, which are clearly not pro-America. So we're getting to a point where you can be America first and be right or left. And I think that coalition has really started to solidify. And it's going to be interesting to see where the next couple election cycles take it, because I think a lot of this last election cycle, the Democrats getting elected was mostly backlash to, Trump not delivering as hard as he could on a lot of the MAGA action items. But there's a couple more of these, so let me just go through a couple more of these before we shut this out. I think there's like 2 or 3 more. So here's one. This is a tweet from Rich Barris, the People's Pundit, who I haven't heard much of his stuff, but he seems to have a pretty decent sized audience, so he must be doing something right. But he says, "Your stupid dumbass will have." So Mark Levin was responding to the Rasmussen Reports guy. He says, "Good to know Rasmussen Reports stands with Carlson, who renounced the GOP, supports little Adolf Fuentes, rewrites World War II in defense of the Third Reich, praises Putin, etc. That's quite a business model at Rasmussen." And Rich Barris says, "Your stupid dumbass will have no friends left. Your mother country will be left all alone in a desert with no political will left in America to give 2 shits. You can't even let Thanksgiving Day go by without this obsession and hatred consuming your X feed. Soon nobody will care." And just to kind of show you the solidarity here, look at that. Look at that list of Jake Shields, I stand with Carlson. Michael Flynn Jr., I stand with Carlson. Mike Benz, How to Lose Friends and Alienate People. Ian Carroll, oh no, what will we ever do without Mark Levin and the Israel First Boomer neocons? Another gold star tweet there. So that is the dynamic on the right, and we're going to see how that plays out. So far, I'm a fan of the direction it's heading, so we'll leave it at that. Now let's get into some serious stuff. The Ukraine war. And not to brag, I take no joy in being right about this all along. But from the beginning, I looked at this as another neocon proxy war, just like Vietnam or Afghanistan. A war where, like Vietnam, Afghanistan's a better example of like, hey, we're going to do this to weaken Russia, and then it blows up in our faces. Like 9/11, right? We gave the Taliban a bunch of money to fight Russia in Afghanistan in the 80s, the 90s, 80s, 90s. I think it was mostly in the 80s. The Mujahideen, and that did not work out. So we're going to keep doing that though, because the money spigot that gets turned on through the fucking American security state is just so strong and powerful that it bleeds into everything, as we're going to see here. And I want to start here by just showing you where we're at in reality. Now, if you listen to the mainstream press, they always dress stuff up in neutral language. They'll never admit that Ukraine is basically fallen for the most part. Russia has taken out their energy grid. They have a dwindling army. They're surrounded. Major cities, major parts of the country have been surrounded or engulfed or taken over completely by Russian troops. So they have a choice to either come to the bargaining table and make some concessions, or fight till Russia completely wins and holds all the cards. And had they taken this off ramp, several years ago, like after the war first started, and they did these I think it was Turkish peace talks or whatever. There were several off ramps, but now the Ukraine's in a position where they don't have any bargaining chips whatsoever. They're down and out. And, Russia has, throughout the course of this, if you've been paying attention to, news outside the mainstream, has even advanced technologically with their weaponry. Russia has mini nuclear reactors now that they've developed to fire missiles and provide energy on the fly. So this is what you're dealing with here. And I think, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because I'm an American. I will live and die. I live and die as an American. I was born here. I will die here probably. And I love my country, but by the same token, I think we have become very arrogant and arrogant speak before the fall, or whatever that cliche is. But we have this attitude that we're the best, we're number one. Oh yeah. And no, we're actually kind of sloppy. And the Russians and the Chinese and the Asians are tight. Like they're much more disciplined and self-aware, I think, than Americans are for the most part. We've had our head up our asses while our government has been terrorizing the world for the last 20 years, patting ourselves on the back for electing a black guy, or we're gonna get a girl to drop the bombs. That's the kind of dumb fuckery that the American mindset has consisted of for the last 20 years. And it's one of the reasons that for the rise of Donald Trump. But I digress. Here's where the reality on the ground sits with this Ukraine war. And we're going to start here with this news of basically near complete collapse on the part of this country. So this is from Lord Bibo, and he says, breaking: Ukrainian government is in a state of collapse. Second-hand man in Ukraine resigns due to corruption. Head of presidential office Andrei Yermak has submitted resignation. Zelensky: there will be a complete reboot of the office of the president of Ukraine. Tomorrow I will hold consultations regarding the new head of the presidential office. It seems Yermak will take all the blame, covering for the boss. Will it help? We'll see. But for now, as we said this morning, it will be interesting. In my opinion, this is not all the interesting things about this situation. Stock up on popcorn and wait for the continuation of this fascinating toad frog drama. Toad frog drama, huh? That's an interesting way of putting it. So here we have Alex Christoforou from the Durin saying, he's sharing this piece from CNN saying, with Yermak gone, Zelensky has lost his muscle and protector. His regime is crumbling. Sharks are circling. And when you see this news of this intense corruption that's kind of spread throughout Zelensky's cabinet and everything, you understand why these people are fighting so hard to keep this going. It's a gigantic spigot of money. And it is, if it gets turned off, it seems like they're already making preparation to aim it somewhere else. So Aaron Mate and Katie Halper recently had a Ukrainian journalist on speaking about this. So I want to give you kind of a little bit more of the Ukrainian side of the story as of right now. And this is actually really good. Listen to what she has to say here.
Donbas, mean Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, and of course Crimea, but also they require Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast. But taking into consideration that Russian forces nowadays are present also in Dnipro region, I believe, and many skeptics believe, that the next plan could include also those territories. So every single next plan will be even worse. Yes, this plan is terrible. Why for Ukraine? Because no security guarantees from Europe and US, basically. Why? Because nobody wants to send their sons to the front line into Ukraine trenches. Nobody wants to sacrifice their loved ones to beat Russia.
See, and that's the problem these people have, is Ukraine is out of people, and no one in the US or Europe is going to go die for Ukraine. It's just not going to happen.
Europe is willing to do, to sacrifice only Ukrainian lives. That's why Ukraine will not be given security guarantees. Ukraine will not be accepted to NATO. So for Russia, it's a very important question. No Ukraine in NATO, no NATO in Ukraine.
So that's kind of also why Russia invaded in the first place. It's like, if you're going to end a war, you don't leave behind the embers to start a new war, right? Like, this whole thing began with, Ukrainian extremists or separatists or anti-Russian forces that the U.S. kind of stoked and gave weapons to, firing stuff into Russia. And Russia basically, there's a story about this I looked for, but it's hard to find in the mainstream press. But Putin actually, or the Russians, reached out to the Biden administration before they invaded. That's how they knew it was going to happen. They sent them a letter saying, hey, look, like, if we don't do something to prevent this, to stop this fighting on our border, we're going to have to take action, which is what they did. And then, of course, the U.S. security state turns around and frames it as this, madman action that Russia just fucking out of nowhere invaded Ukraine, when they all knew that it was going to happen. Russia told them they were going to do it. They just waited for it to happen, just like a lot of things. They waited for it to happen so they could leverage it for their political agendas.
So basically, this plan is all about this and Ukraine army. So the point of Zelensky is, if we do not receive security guarantees from Europe and US, we should have a strong and big army. So, but Russia said no big army and no long-range missiles and drones, because they're afraid that they will.
And again, we've let the war pigs in the EU and US have allowed it to get to this point where they have no bargaining chips. Russia is at the point, if you listen to the people who have been to Russia, who have seen, journalists who are actually honest and aren't paid regime journalists, they will tell you that it's over. But you don't get that vibe from the mainstream press for a reason, because there's a lot of money involved, as we just found out with the Ukrainian corruption scandal. And the conspiracy theorist in me thinks that someone in the Trump administration likely leaked that information or helped that information come to light, so that they had another quiver in their, arrow in their quiver for a peace deal. Look, America, this is where your money's going. Why would you keep supporting this? And now you see the reboots, the attempts to reboot Russiagate, like, oh, Trump's a secret Russian. Blah, blah. And again, I think those people have lost all trust, and no one's going to
will hit Russian territory. That's why, yes, the conditions are catastrophic. That's why in Ukraine society, from yesterday, when this plan was leaked to Western media, the main association is capitulation. Everyone is talking about capitulation, and it's very dangerous rhetoric. Why? Because in 2019, actually, it was already a big move.
Capitulation. Again, you either capitulate or you lose on the battlefield. Russia just takes over your country completely. That's the choices you have on the table right now. Unless Europe or the United States gets involved with actual boots on the ground, which ain't going to happen. I would love to see them attempt to do that, to be honest. I would love to see the reaction to them going like, oh, all right, America, we're going to draft you to go fight Russia and Ukraine. You would see the kind of civil unrest you've never seen since Vietnam era.
No to capitulation organized by far-right, by Poroshenko. They threatened Zelensky to hang him on the Maidan Square, on the main square of the country's sacred for this revolution of dignity and for the protest. So I believe that those who benefits from the war, I mean some oligarchs, I mean some businessmen, I mean far-right, including the entire Azov movement, private sector and other, they will refuse to surrender, and they will, because as we see, Bieletsky said nothing about the corruption scandal.
Bieletsky is the one of the founders of the Azov Battalion.
Yes, and he's the leader of entire Azov movement.
Yes.
When we look at their gatherings, especially youth gatherings, they praise Bieletsky as it's Hitler-Jugend style. They praise him as a leader of nation, as a father of nation, with the same rhetoric. And Bieletsky, with all his credibility, he kept silence on this corruption scandal. Why? Because he is on payroll of Zelensky and his office.
So that is the reality. All of these people, there's so much money being blown into Ukraine that literally everyone is being bribed, including the EU and NATO, as we're going to get into in a few minutes. And I shouldn't make those claims without proof because I don't have solid proof of that, but I think it's pretty obvious. It's a let's say this. It's a fair assumption to make. It's a fair assessment of the situation and why they're so against shutting this down. But also, we have known for a long time that Zelensky and his regime are corrupt. And here is proof of that from back in October from another Ukrainian journalist.
This is Zelensky's corruption that is destroying Ukraine. How did this happen? Let's look at the facts. Zelensky has always chosen the dirtiest path. Even before becoming president, Zelensky worked for all the Ukrainian oligarchs and criminals. According to the Panama Papers, even before becoming president, Zelensky created a network of offshore...
People forget, too, just a quick sidebar, Hunter Biden had a no-show job in Ukraine on like an energy board there. That's how fucking what a laundromat for corrupt bullshit that country is.
Companies around the world to evade taxes. Millions of dollars obtained illegally were laundered through real estate all over the world. From Russia's Crimea to London. Back in 2016, the offshore company...
There's a lot of our money that's going to Russia, I read too. There are people funneling money to Russia from the Ukrainian war funds.
SHSN Limited, with ties to Zelensky.
To be honest, I don't really feel too bad about that after what we did freezing Russia's assets, as if we're some like moral authority on the world stage who has the right to dictate that to people.
Bought a 3-room apartment on Glentworth Street for $2.3 million. 2 years later, the same fund acquired a 2-room apartment on the famous Baker Street for $3.5 million.
So as you can see, what Zelensky's doing is using a shell company to buy up real estate with American money. So he has a nice little landing pad to go to, and that's a better way to hide your money. You launder it through real estate. That's why there's so many empty apartments in New York and LA.
A year later, in 2019, Zelensky purchased a mansion on the Mediterranean coast in the small resort town of Forte dei Marmi. The price was 4.5 million euros. He registered the property in the name of his wife, Elena. Zelensky purchased another house for his family in Miami. All this before the war, before billions of dollars began flowing from the Russian army.
So apparently that was before the war. So I backtrack there a little bit. I think I said this was from American money, but there's plenty of evidence that they're funneling American money to this type of thing too. And Zelensky basically has a real estate empire built on a foundation of Ukrainian blood. And that is a tough foundation to build your empire on, because it's going to come back to haunt you in the long run, one way or another. As we've seen historically, there's a historical precedent for this type of situation. It never ends well for the Zelenskys in the story. It never ends well. And I don't wish any harm on Zelensky. You know, I think he's a person who probably doing what a lot of people in his situation would do, corrupt as it may be. And he's dealing with a lot of different pressures from, obviously the extreme right Azov people in his country, as well as the U.S. military complex and the European military complex, and even probably aspects of Russian society, I would imagine, because Ukrainian and Russian society are very tied together. So we've known for a long time that Zelensky is corrupt, and it's kind of all coming apart now. So, I really hope that the Trump administration can wind this thing down in a way that actually ends the killing. And I don't know that that's possible, largely because the EU wants to keep the war going for a lot of different reasons, which we're going to get into here. But let's start with the mighty George Galloway, who recently appeared on Tucker Carlson's and who was recently detained at an airport as like some kind of a terrorist. This is a guy, much like Tulsi Gabbard, who has served his country for years honorably, and because of his political stances now is being targeted by, security state goons. So listen to what he has to say about the current state of Ukraine and maybe the possible motivations behind.
Be honest here, European politics is not my politics, and it's confusing, despite however hard I've tried to understand it. And I don't fully think I comprehend why nations that are beset with systemic and very serious problems, including economic problems, that don't have meaningful standing armies, they can't prevail if they were actually to fight Russia. I mean, of course, they would lose. But why would they want to? Why are they dead set on war with Russia? Do you understand the motive?
Well, there's an old First World War truism. We're here because we're here. And ultimately, we'll be here to guard the graves of those that were here because they were here. It's partly that they have dug themselves, I don't want to get Shakespearean, but they are steeped in blood so far that it is a genuine question whether it's bloodier to go on or to go o'er. And they have spent so many hundreds of billions of euros, pounds, dollars of their people's money in a forlorn charge of the Light Brigade that it's fatal for them politically to admit that they were wrong, that they
trying to bleed Russia. Like, why do we allow this to continue? This is obviously Europe, but the same dynamic is occurring here, and it's kind of infected Europe. The same dynamic has been occurring here since 2000. And now it's really, Europe used to be maybe the bulwark against it. I know a lot of European countries were against the Iraq war,
They misused all those funds and they caused the deaths of all those people for no reason. And so
maybe that's a function of the EU too. I mean, obviously it is. Now that I think about it, you look at Kaja Kallas and what's her name? Ursula. The perfect name for a female supervillain at the helm of a destructive world organization, Ursula.
It seems to me it's partly that. Don't forget, Mr. Carlson, these people are at rock bottom in public opinion approval rates. Keir Starmer's currently at 10%. 10%. Only 19% of the people actually voted for him a year ago and a bit ago in the general election. But now it's down to 10. Macron is at 11. Merz is at 18. They couldn't muster a majority if you put them all together. And so what choice do they have? It's continue to reinforce failure, to continue to throw good money after bad, to continue digging, even though they know they're in a hole. So I don't know what choice they really have. The question is, bigger question for me, is why are the media, as they still describe themselves, not holding to account? You mentioned that you first knew me and didn't like me because of my stand on the Iraq war. I was on the BBC every single day in the run-up to the Iraq war, right throughout the war and for many months after. Virtually every single day. I haven't been on the BBC for 10 years. The mass media, as they still call themselves, though, the real mass media is you and exponentially less me, but the people who call themselves the mass media have entirely given up any role that they might have had to hold to account the political leaders for making decisions that are manifestly not working. An American leader said just yesterday, forgive me, I didn't know him, forgotten his name. He said about the European Union's 19 sanctions packages against Russia. He said, well, if you've tried something 19 times, you've got to admit you've failed already. And yet they are currently planning a 20th round of sanctions against Russia. And I didn't properly answer a point you made earlier. These societies, of one of which my own, are not just economically failing. They are culturally and socially disintegrating. Hatred, racial hatred, fear of immigration, large-scale immigration, collapsing birth rates, demographic time bombs. Our societies are the very definition of sick societies. So what are we doing about it? Well, we're sending uncounted and uncountable and untraceable billions to the little chiseling crook in Kiev.
How often do you give a...
Well said, Mr. Galloway. So this got me thinking, just watching Europe try to keep this war going, one of the most prominent voices in that crusade is Kaja Kallas, who was a former Estonian prime minister, I guess, who is now a high-ranking member of the EU Parliament, I guess, based on what I've learned about her. And what I think this says, and tell me if you think I'm full of shit in the comments here, but in the Obama era, the post-Obama era was supposed to be Hillary Clinton. And the United States rejected that, despite all of the push to get us to accept Hillary. There was just enough of the country that was like, no, fuck that Trump won in 2016. While Europe kind of continued down this Obama era identity politics trajectory. And so now in Europe, the dynamic you have is like, yay, girl power, Ursula and Kaja Kallas are leading the charge for girl power, girl boss diplomacy or whatever, where it's just neocon, the same old neocon bullshit dressed up in identity politics to make it more palatable for liberals, which is what Obama was. But the silver lining in the United States is that a lot of people rejected that, and then they rejected it even more the second time around with Kamala Harris this next time. But Europe is still stuck in this, post-Obama identity politics world where they can just put a girl in there and it's awesome. Everyone's just, So Europe is really desperately trying to subvert Trump and keep the war going. And this woman, Kaja Kallas, is one of the biggest advocates for that. And so I guess what she said back in the day, she proposed disarming Russia. European diplomacy is back in action. The politician proposed limiting the Russian army and military budget. If we want to prevent the conflict from continuing, then we must actually limit the Russian army and its military budget. With what? And again, this is the interesting disconnect. Russia's winning the war. They're not going to concede to this. And this is the game these guys are kind of playing to keep this going. But let's even go a little bit further back to the justification for this war. I saw this clip actually from Colbert, and I'm not going to play the whole thing, but this is from way back in the Obama era. And this guy
here to tell me how to reanimate Reagan is the editor of Foreign Affairs magazine, Gideon Rose. Mr. Rose, thank you so much for being here.
And this is the Glenn Deason actually who dug this up, but he said in February 2014, before the U.S.-backed coup, Gideon Rose gloated about how the U.S. was taking Ukraine while Russia was distracted by the Sochi Olympics. He left out that only 20% of Ukrainians wanted to join NATO. I'm just going to jump up to the
did really well. And focus on the Olympics. Here's a shiny object. We'll just take an entire country away from you. Basically. Now, there's a power vacuum right now. There's a power vacuum. The opposite.
So he makes this analogy at the beginning about how, such a cheesy analogy, how Ukraine has a boyfriend and Russia's like the bad thug guy, and they need to get with like a nice, well-established yuppie like the US. That's literally the analogy that he makes. But this is the example of how the Obama era really softened neocon diplomacy and neocon policy so that it made it digestible, that they sugar-coated it with liberal bullshit so we could all go, oh yeah, we're fine with this now because liberals are doing it and we're doing it for the good of, you name it, democracy, whatever.
Position is all together, which it's easy to agree on getting rid of the bad old regime and much harder to create a stable country in which everybody compromises and moves forward. But they need a strong leader to move the country forward. Do you know who's always good at a moment like that? Vladimir Putin.
Stephen Colbert used to actually be good. That's a taste of back when Stephen Colbert was actually funny and doing relevant political commentary. Boy, I miss that era because it's long gone. But back to Kaja Kallas here. It got me thinking about, why would this woman have such a vested interest in keeping this war going? And then I read some stories, which I didn't collect today, but you can find them on Twitter or in Google, about Ukrainian money being laundered through Estonian banks. She's the former PM of Estonia, so I'm sure she has a very strong list of connections in the financial, elite there. And then you have this from her Wikipedia page, which doesn't prove anything in the current climate, but also gives you an idea as to how people like her move. So this is from Wikipedia about Kaja's husband's business scandal. So in August 2023, the media reported that Callas's husband, Arvo Halik, had a 24.9% share in transportation company Stark Logistics, which had continued to transport raw materials to Russia following the Russia invasion of Ukraine. Despite Callas having previously called for Estonian companies to cease operations in Russia, the company had generated approximately 1.5 million in revenue from providing a transport service to a company operating in Russia since the beginning of the invasion. Callas later admitted to her husband's share in the company, but denied wrongdoing on the part of herself or her husband, and stated that the company's business in Russia was to assist an Estonian client identified by the Estonian media as the company Metaprint, and its production in Russia, adding that not a single euro, dollar, or ruble was spent in Russia as part of the activity. But it shows you how unserious their claims really are. Because if they were really seriously devoted to, Russia's an enemy of democracy, they wouldn't be spending this kind of money there. And, this is the excuse. I don't know how much I believe her excuse. Stark Logistics seconded Callas's claim, and that the company's dealings in the economy in any way did not violate Estonian law, as Callas's government had prohibited only state-owned companies from working with Russia. The Estonian media has separately reported that Metaprint sold 17 million worth of goods to Russia between the start of the invasion in February 2022 and November 2022. Halik's business partner, Marty Lemedek, later admitted in the Estonian media that the company had sold over 32 million in goods on the Russian market between February 2022 and August 2023. The company also collaborated with sanctioned individuals such as Polish-sanctioned Sergei Kolesnikov. Halik later stated he would sell his shares in Stark Logistics. So the Europeans become more and more like the Americans every fucking day. That sounds just like a Dick Cheney Halliburton thing. And surprise, surprise, there is a Dick Cheney Halliburton LLC in Ukraine. And this same story I covered a while back, Halliburton and KBR, some of those American contractors were still providing services to Russian oil fields after the invasion started. So again, that this is not a serious war to save democracy. It's a money grift. It's a money laundering op. And the way that these people carry themselves in private when they don't think people are looking confirms that reality. So to keep going here about, just to keep hammering on Kaja Kallas here a little bit. These are some of the beefs with her from Twitter. And this is kind of how she started her language around this war.
Defeat is not a bad thing, because then there could be really a change in the society, and there are many different nations right now part of Russia as well. I think if you would have more like small nations, it's not a bad thing if the big power is actually much smaller.
So she is admitting that the attempt here is to break up Russia into smaller pieces. And last but not least, this is recent footage of her desperately making the claim that Russia has invaded 19 countries.
100 years, Russia has attacked more than 19 countries, and some as many as 3 or 4 times. None of these countries has ever attacked Russia. So in any peace agreement, we have to put the focus on how to get concessions from Russian side. In the last 100 years, Russia has attacked...
So this is the line that the Europeans are running with. And Glenn Deason here says, Alice argues no country has attacked Russia in the last 100 years. In Europe, we live in a delusional alternate reality, as no journalist will push back on such absurdities. They do not want to be seen as defending Russia. The lunatics have immunity and are running the show. And that's what they're doing to Trump and Witkoff, which we're going to get into in a minute here in the United States, is again trying to be like, oh, you're pro-Russia. Because for a lot of dumb fucks who still think that the Mockingbird networks are a valuable source of information, like they believe that dumb shit. And I don't know that there's any getting around that other than, just kind of letting things play out as they're going to play out. So this last clip I want to share with you is Putin kind of talking about the dynamic in Europe, because this is one of the reasons Europe has become so desperate. Is they used to be able to buy cheap energy.
Европейцы сами начали от нас отгораживаться. Ну, скажем, в энергетике известный результат. Значит, конкурентоспособность падает.
Germany's economy has been in recession.
Третий год подряд находится в
Third year in a row.
Ну, что же на это сказать?
What can
Если они вдруг решат вернуться,
they suddenly decide to turn around. Please, I have already said many times, we are not against it. We are open to working with everyone.
Конечно,
of course, taking into account the current realities, I mean that many riches
что многие ниши на нашем рынке заняты
in our market are primarily occupied by
российскими производителями, российскими
предпринимателями.
Ну, а
So Chase is saying another dose of reality from Putin here. Germany's been in recession for 3 years after giving up Russian energy. It's not too late for the Europeans to turn around if they acknowledge current realities, which they're not doing. They're pretending that they haven't been completely raped by the United States. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. That was sending them cheap gas. And now they have to buy it at, what's basically happening too now is they're just buying Russian energy through like middlemen like India or China at a markup. So way to go. You really showed them, Europe and US, like it's very stupid. And again, the reason it's stupid is intentional, because this is a gigantic fire hydrant of money, just spraying money at these people, and they're routing it to, shady real estate deals, for example. And here is Germany's response. Instead of Germany, dealing with the reality of what's going on, this is where Germany's at currently. This is a tweet from George Galloway. What in madness is this? Germany is preparing a secret operational plan for NATO in the event of a conflict with Russia. 800,000 soldiers on the Eastern Front. The German armed forces are developing a detailed operational plan for the event of an armed conflict with Russia. Putin has not at any point said anything about invading Russia. So this is also curious, because desperate times call for desperate measures. So what this suggests to me, and this is obviously just my opinion, my summarization, what I surmise based on this evidence, they're going to put up forces at the border with Russia and maybe attempt to manufacture a conflict that gives them an opportunity to start attacking Russia from Germany, which is a very stupid thing to do, because Russia has them outgunned and outmanned without the United States. And all the signs in the United States are pointing away from this type of a conflict, especially with the popular consensus among the people. Now, if you listen to the Democratic and Republican politicians here, they're all on board with any kind of war, because they're going to get some kind of enrichment from it, much like what's happening here in Europe. So with that in mind, I want to move along to where the United States foreign policy currently stands with Russia, Ukraine, because I do believe that Trump was honest when he said he wanted to end this war and that he could do it quickly. I don't think he was prepared for the level of opposition he was going to run into, because I don't think he knew how deep the corruption runs and how much money is being blown out. And I also think that people like Marco Rubio and some of the more nefarious people in his current administration probably thought they could bribe him into being like, nah, dude, like, here's some, we'll send you a couple mil if you just let's just keep this going. But the reality on the ground won't allow it to keep going. Again, Ukraine is running out of people. They're largely surrounded. Their energy infrastructure is dead. So I want to get into some clips here from the man, Douglas McGregor, talking about just the realities on the ground, just so you can hear it from someone who, a military mind, who, you know, probably has a better, more access to information than I do.
My schedule today, before we get to a fascinating piece you have posted at the American Conservative on the consequences of an American attack on or invasion of Venezuela, I have to ask you about the latest involving Ukraine, the 28-point peace proposal reduced to 20, wherever it stands, whatever we know. But big question, and I've asked you this before, as well as just about all of our military experts on the show. Will the war in Ukraine end on the battlefield or in a conference room?
I think primarily on the battlefield. The conference room will follow quickly thereafter. And I think we're approaching that point. You know, I think what's happening now finally is this empire of lies constructed by Washington and its allies, globalist allies in Europe, is collapsing. The truth can no longer be concealed, although they continue to try and lie their way out of it. But this empire of lies is falling apart. The lie that Russia can't win, Russia's falling apart, Russia's ruled by this evil dictator that the population doesn't support, that somehow or another Zelensky is a patriot, another.
What he's saying there really got me thinking about COVID and the kind of response to COVID, the pandemic response being a dry run for this kind of like propaganda architecture to keep us from getting any real information about Ukraine. You know, they did this with people who said things about COVID that were not inside the mainstream guidelines instantly. And they did a lot to Ukraine with Ukraine stuff. I've had a bunch of my videos delisted from TikTok about Ukraine. YouTube, not as much. YouTube's been a little bit less censorious, but you know, just him talking about this and how the empire of lies is kind of crumbling made me think of that. You know, it's almost like the entire architecture of the COVID information infrastructure was built to keep a war like this going, because no one would know anything but what, you know, the anointed voices were saying otherwise.
Washington without the powdered wig, this kind of nonsense, it's all falling apart. So I think the Ukrainian army is surrendering in droves. Many of their senior commanders are walking into some sort of prisoner of war status with the Russians. And I'm hearing from some of my best informers, or informants, if you will, that there is now open talk in Ukrainian ranks about going to Kiev and finishing off this regime, holding Zelensky and his friends accountable, not just for the billions that they've stolen, but the millions of lives they've destroyed.
So that is a very, very important point he just made there, if that's true. What he's saying there is that the Ukrainian army itself is about to, what's the word they use on a ship when the crew revolts against the captain? It's escaping me now. But they're basically about to turn on Zelensky. With the news of this corruption, it's just icing on the cake that, hey, our family and friends have been dying in the name of this war, and now we're finding out what a gigantic fraud money laundering operation it is. So, of course, like I said earlier, Zelensky has knives out. He has knives out for him in a lot of different circles right now. He's a very, I'm sure he's well protected, but wow, that's crazy.
You mean it?
Okay, so this next clip from McGregor continues kind of about the reality on the ground in Ukraine and where things are headed.
John Bolton ideology?
Yes, I think so. I think they also can identify similar people in Starmer's government in London, similar people in Paris, similar people in Berlin. So I think they do understand. And again, you know,
so what they're talking about here, just to preface this, because I cut off the beginning, is Napolitano asked him if Russia is aware that there are forces in Trump's government trying to subvert the peace deal, basically trying to make sure that like this doesn't actually have legs.
That you mentioned, I think we should all keep in mind, if nothing else, President Putin, Mr. Lavrov, and others will always be polite.
Yes.
They always have been polite, but nothing is going to come of any of it. And why would it? It's time to end this thing. And things are moving very rapidly in the direction of Moscow.
So that's where McGregor is saying things are on the ground. But I want to get a little bit more into the politics of this war with your boy Glenn Greenwald, because he's going to explain what the neocon long stays, the derp state, if you will, are attempting to do to try and subvert this and prevent peace from happening, which is interesting either way. I mean, I think I was thinking about it, like, why would they want to keep this going, even though they know it's over one way or another? Like, eventually Kiev will topple to the Russians, and then that's it. But I think it looks bad on Trump if that happens. If he allows that to happen, they can go, oh, look, see, he let Kiev fall to Putin and stuff, you know, in under his tenure, and he said he was going to end the war and da-da-da-da. So there's a lot of motivation that these people have aside from the money, political motivation to keep this thing going. But I'll let Glenn Greenwald kind of explain the nuance of what Rubio's been up to, because he does a great job outlining this whole.
The Russians to agree to a peace deal. But what happened instead was Marco Rubio, who has always been a neocon and a warmonger despite efforts to try and mold himself into the Trump administration, decided that he was going to get involved and flew to Ukraine to involve himself, to insinuate himself into a peace deal that fortunately he had been left out of. And he announced in Ukraine, oh, we made great progress, meaning.
So I do also want to say, it looks like with this 28-point peace plan, whatever, it was clearly like a starting point for negotiations. It was, Russia wasn't going to agree to some of it. Ukraine wasn't going to agree to some of it. But it's interesting to note that this time they left people like Rubio out of the debate, because Trump did get rid of Mike Waltz. And this is why, again, I say, not to defend Trump, but to defend Trump, he's dealing with a lot of different moving pieces with each of these individual issues, whether it's tariffs, whether it's the Ukraine war, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's, the government shutdown, whatever. There's a lot of different, it's not like running a company where you can be like, I'm the CEO, I say do this, go do it. It has to run through these other parts. And then you have all these government long stays and these people with agendas of their own, like a Marco Rubio, who are working, low key to subvert their goals. So I think it's telling that he was kept out of these meetings and then had to rush over and try to make it look like he was keeping the war going. Maybe he works more for NATO and the EU and the people who want the war to keep going than he does for Trump. I mean, it sounds like that's the case. So,
not we and the Russians, but we and the Ukrainians. We got a deal that the Ukrainians are going to agree to. And the only way that happened was because Marco Rubio created a peace deal with Zelensky that the Russians in a zillion years would and could never accept. In other words, Marco Rubio is there trying to sabotage the policy on which Trump ran of ending the war between Russia and Ukraine, because Marco Rubio doesn't want that war to end, because Marco Rubio, despite all the rhetorical flourishes designed to ingratiate himself with Trump, is in fact the same neocon and warmonger that he always was, part of the GOP establishment. Here's how the New York Times framed it. Of course, the New York Times.
He was a never Trumper. Trump made fun of him. I wish I had got that clip of him drinking the water at that one debate. So funny. He looks so tore up.
Is on the side of Rubio. The New York Times is on the side of Ukraine, wanting this war to continue. New York Times, November 24th, 2025, how Marco Rubio tried to bring a pro-Russia peace plan to a middle ground. So you have Trump and J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff defending and praising the plan that they negotiated with the Russians. It's the Russians you have to negotiate with. They're the ones who are winning. And then Marco Rubio flies to Ukraine, and in the words of the New York Times, transforms a pro-Russian peace plan into a middle ground. All right, let us take a moment to examine
real
something
quick.
happening.
I want to show you this. This is what I was thinking of. Good old Marco.
Policy of America continues to be indispensable to the goal of global liberty. property, and safeguarding human rights. The world is a better place when America is the strongest nation on earth. But we can't remain powerful if we don't have an economy that can afford it. In the short time that I've been here in Washington, nothing has frustrated me more than false choices like the one the president laid out tonight. The choice isn't just between big government or big business. What we need is an accountable, efficient, and effective government that allows small and new businesses to create more middle-class jobs.
They all pander to the middle class when they're running, but never do anything to help the middle class when they actually get in there. Marco Rubio, great example of that. So here's the second part of Glenn's little bit about Rubio subverting the peace process through his position in the administration.
This is what they said, quote, last week, President Trump set a hard deadline for Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky to agree to the details of a 28-point draft peace plan with Russia. If he refused, Mr. Trump said the Ukrainian leader would be left to, quote, fight his little heart out. By Monday, that deadline, Thanksgiving, was gone. The 28-point plan.
Trump is the funniest president we've ever had. By the way, I love the way the New York Times and these media outlets always frame this as like, look at the big mean Trump said he could fight his little heart out. And it's really funny because you know that Trump is saying that because he's frustrated with the fact that this guy is not playing ball and he wants to end the war and this guy is going against him. So he's like, yeah, he could fight his little fucking heart out.
Which was widely criticized as a series of one-sided concessions to Putin, then has shrunk to closer to 20 points. The price of the changes made during a series of meetings over 11 hours in Geneva, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, is clear. Mr. Putin, some Trump administration officials predict, is likely to dismiss the new draft out of hand. By any measure, the administration's rollout of the new plan was maladroit at best. Mr. Rubio downplayed the proposal last Wednesday as a, quote, list of potential ideas, while Mr. Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Carolyn Leavitt, the White House press secretary, embraced it.
So this is how you know what's going on here with Rubio trying to subvert Trump's agenda here is the real, because the New York Times is on Rubio's side. They're also trying to keep the war going. They're also trying to pretend that, you know, Putin is this threat to Europe, like he's going to start invading other countries now and stuff, which it's not going to happen. That would be a strategically foolish move on the Russians' part. And they're, like it or not, they're not like us.
Shouldn't Trump, J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff outweigh what Marco Rubio wants? It's Trump who's the elected president. Trump was out there touting this plan as an important step of progress, and then Rubio somehow goes and undermines it all and does a deal with the Ukrainians that has zero chance of ending the war, which is what Trump says,
which is what they want.
His policy goal is. The New York Times goes on. The specifics outrage the Europeans who have been kept in the dark, even though they are funding Ukraine's arms and designing a security guarantee for the country. Republican leaders were equally blistering about the leaked proposals, including Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the former majority leader, who said in a statement that, quote, Putin has spent the entire year trying to play President Trump for a fool. In Kiev, the Secretary of the U.S. Army, Daniel Driscoll, a friend of Mr. Vance's, presented the proposal to skeptical Ukrainian officials. By Saturday, Mr. Rubio was in damage control. He headed to Geneva to meet with Ukrainian and European officials. So essentially now we went from having a deal that could very much have finally ended this war to Marco Rubio somehow insinuating himself into all of this and single-handedly sabotaging it by removing all of the parts of the deal that would have made it at least preliminarily attractive to Russia, and maybe not gone as far as the insane Europeans went, but still became a lot closer to the European model of pretending that Ukraine is winning this war and that Russia is suing for peace and that Russia has to simply sign whatever deal the West puts in front of them because Zelensky has the Kremlin surrounded. It is insanity of the highest order. This war makes no sense from the perspective of American interest. 0 sense from the perspective of American interest. When you add on to the fact that even the pretext that we had that Ukraine is a democracy is gone, given that Zelensky has shut down every conceivable democratic attribute, including elections and free speech and a free press, and the proof, not that anyone needed it, but the proof that there's now massive embezzlement taking place in Kiev, where the money that we're sending to the Ukrainians is simply being siphoned off by corrupt officials very close to Zelensky for their own personal wealth. This is one of the most senseless, obscene wars we've seen in a long time, and we've seen a lot of senseless, obscene wars. But as J.D. Vance said, nothing animates the bipartisan DC class. He really talked about the Republican establishment more than ensuring that wars continue without end. And Marco Rubio and a lot of other people inside the US government are doing everything possible to sabotage what Trump said he wanted, what the plan that Trump endorsed and ratified and publicly defended, in order to ensure not that Ukraine gets a better deal when this war ends, but that this war never actually ends.
And this is why they push so hard to have someone like I tried so hard and got so far. Because the same dynamic would not be occurring if the Democrats had won. Let's be completely honest here. They would be going full bore with this war, dumping as much as they could into it. The liberals would be marching in lockstep behind them. But at least here you have a clear division in the administration. And it's got to be frustrating for an insurgent candidate like Trump, because you have to rely to some degree on these neocons and the party infrastructure that already exists. You have to staff up your administration with people. And some of them are going to be people you don't trust or like, clearly, Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham, which, who knows with Trump. It seems like his relationship with Graham is a personal one. So, I don't claim to have all the answers. What I do like here is this dynamic of the establishment freaking out about Trump trying to end a war, and their clear and pathetic clawing, just like with Callus here and some of these people, just clear and pathetic attempts to ignore reality in favor of a constructed reality that everyone can kind of clearly see through, especially now, despite this news of corruption, this like clear picture of how these scumbags are taking EU and US tax dollars and funneling them into real estate deals in their own bank accounts. These guys are still fighting their ass off to keep this going. And I want to close this segment out with one more little piece from Glenn Greenwald here about Steve Witkoff, because similar to Rubio and what's going on with the peace plan that they kind of like secretly left him out of, you have another wing going after Witkoff for actually having real negotiations with the Russians.
That I think is extremely disturbing and very consequential. And before I get to that, I just want to set the context for it, which is that this is not the first time we've seen something like this happen. I think one of the most underappreciated events of the first term of President Trump, what was done to General Michael Flynn.
So I'm going to jump ahead here, but basically what he lays out here is how Flynn was kind of sucked into a perjury trap by the FBI for doing something that every official in his position does, and calling and talking to the Russians via the security state. And Glenn makes a great point that this is the type of shit that, people like Snowden and Chelsea Manning were warning us about with their whistleblowing.
Information designed to expose government corruption, government deceit, government illegality. That's not what this was. The NSA wasn't trying to expose illegality. It was trying to undermine policies with which it disagrees by using its spying powers, abusing its spying powers to try and destroy the Trump administration's efforts to improve relations with the Russians. And for all the hysteria about Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and Daniel Ellsberg and Edward Snowden and their leaking, under the US code, the most serious leaking crime, in fact, it's one of the very few crimes that not just the leakers, but the journalists can be prosecuted for, is if you leak the contents of telephone calls that the NSA has spied on. Because among other things, not only is it a huge invasion of privacy, but also it alerts the officials that the NSA has spied on that their phones are compromised. It shows the Russians, it shows Kislyak, it shows the Russian officials, the NSA has compromised your phone. They're able to listen in your conversations, and obviously they will then adjust their security measures, and the NSA will lose that access. So that's considered the worst crime, but the NSA did exactly that along with the Washington Post, not to expose government law breaking, but to undermine and sabotage the newly elected president's policy of trying to improve relations with Russia. So that brings us to today, and a very similar thing happened just about an hour and a half ago. Steve Witkoff is the person on whom President Trump most relies, who he most trusts, to negotiate peace deals He's known Witkoff forever. Witkoff's a New York real estate billionaire like Trump. They go back a long way. He trusts Witkoff completely. And he tasked Witkoff to try and negotiate the deals, the 2 ceasefire deals that President Trump was able to engineer between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza. And now Witkoff has been tasked to work on a peace deal between the Russians and...
Yeah, we've seen how well that peace deal is holding up in Gaza. So we'll just let Trump take the L on that one for now.
The Ukrainians to end the war, which is one of the President Trump's top foreign policy priorities, even though so many Republicans, even his own Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and most of the deep state oppose this plan. That is the elected president's policy. And as part of his work for the president, Witkoff was speaking to top-level Russian officials and a Western intelligence agency, if probably the NSA, maybe the British counterparts, spied on those conversations, created transcripts of Steve Witkoff's conversations with Russian officials that were geared toward facilitating a peace deal with Ukraine that many people inside the U.S. government...
Even that's such a fucking propaganda headline. Witkoff advised Russia on how to... So it's almost like they're trying to upset Trump, like they're trying to make him mad, like he's being left out of something.
Want to sabotage, and then leak the contents of those telephone calls to Bloomberg, which then published it. Here you see the Bloomberg article. This is just an hour or two ago. Bloomberg, Witkoff advised Russia on how to pitch Ukraine plan to Trump. And the framing here is designed to suggest that Steve Witkoff was somehow working in collaboration with the Russians against the United States, that he was sort of acting almost in a treasonous manner to betray his own country by giving tips to the Russians on how they could speak to President Trump.
When actually the reverse is true. He's actually out there. It's in America's best interest to end this spigot of money that corrupt people are stealing from us
in order to facilitate a peace deal, to get a better peace deal. Now, it's so childish to think this isn't what a negotiator does. Steve Witkoff's goal, his task, his assignment is to get a peace deal done between Russia and Ukraine. And whatever he has to do to try and get that done is what he's supposed to be doing. But the NSA or British intelligence or whomever who spied on this call leaked this call and the transcript of it. Again, if it's the NSA, that means spying not on a foreign adversary, but on a United States official, on an American citizen, and then leaking the contents of their call in order to make it seem like Steve Witkoff had done something treacherous, that he was, again, this Russiagate narrative, that he was working on behalf of the Russians. When what he's actually doing is his assignment that President Trump has given him of trying to facilitate a peace deal. So here's part of what Bloomberg said with these transcripts. Quote, in an October 14th phone call that lasted a little over 5 minutes, Witkoff advised Yuri Yushkov, Putin's top foreign policy aide, on how the Russian leader should broach the issue with Trump. His guidance included suggestions on setting up a Trump-Putin call before Zelensky's White House visit later that week and using the Gaza agreement as a way in. Quote, this story proves one thing. Okay, so that's the framing, is that Witkoff is giving tips to the Russians on how to deal with Trump. So we're all supposed to say, oh my God, Witkoff is betraying the United States government. Yeah. He's betraying Trump. He's working with the Russians on how to manipulate Trump. And that's why we leaked the call.
No.
Russia
Did it.
House believe that this is exactly what Steve Witkoff is supposed to be doing. So Bloomberg took these transcripts to the White House and said, here's what Steve Witkoff was saying to the Russians. What is your response?
I like the response.
And here's what the White House said, quote, this story proves one thing. This is White House Communications Director Stephen Chung. This story proves one thing. Special Envoy Witkoff talks to officials in both Russia and Ukraine nearly every day to achieve peace, which is exactly what President Trump appointed him to do. It's a little bit difficult to try and say that somehow Steve Witkoff was betraying President Trump, was betraying the United States government, when the policy of the United States government is determined by the elected president, which is President Trump.
So there you go. A couple other things I would like to add to that. The first one is we are literally being robbed. Literally, like that's proven. Zelensky and his buddies are funneling this money into their own accounts. We're literally being robbed through our tax code as taxpayers. We are being robbed. This is how they've been doing it for years too. They like Afghanistan, Iraq, all these are highway robbery. And, you know, I don't think most people are against a strong military or like having, you know, some kind of a military footprint in the world to some degree. I think most people are against that, but this is just clearly a corrupt, wasteful money pit. And imagine if that gets shut off and then you have that money in your budget to spend on things like, improving American streets or schools or roads or bridges or any of the crumbling infrastructure issues we're having, or, you name it. There's a laundry list of things. Imagine if half that money went to, a couple different American cities. It's insane. Point number 2, who gives a fuck what Europe thinks? We broke away from Europe. But yeah, if you guys want to try to take on Russia, good luck with that, you dummies. Your militaries are dilapidated without the United States backing and everything. It's just not a wise move. Your economies are in shambles like ours, and this is the result of the continuance of neocon policy dressed up in identity politics, dressed up as, liberal. Sadly, it was really Obama's era of managed decline in identity politics that got us to the point where Trump was a viable option, and I have to say, based on stuff like this, where you can see how clearly the establishment is aligned against his agenda, he was the best. I stand firm on my take that he was the lesser of the two evils in this last cycle. There's no doubt about that in my mind when I see people like Jay Bhattacharya who are part of his administration. So I want to close out today with the new diversion, which is the Venezuela war. And again, you can tell that this is the wrong side of history to be on, supporting a war with Venezuela, if you look at all the usual suspects, like, for example, the New York Times. So here is your boy Max Blumenthal, the same NY Times that lionized Maria Corina Machado as Iron Lady fighting for democracy has finally concluded that she's a conduit for the gargantuan lies underpinning the Trump admin's looming regime change war. NYT even breaks corporate media's silence on the CIA's involvement. So I didn't get his whole tweet, but here's the clip from the New York Times, and he has it highlighted. The term the origins of the term. So everybody knows Venezuela today is the main channel of cocaine, and that this is a business that has been run by Maduro. Ms. Machado told CNN, the regime has turned Cartel de las Soles into one of the most powerful criminal structures all along this continent and other continents as well. The origins of using the term called Cartel de las Soles to describe illicit military activities stretch back to an era well before Mr. Maduro became president in 2013. The term gained traction after a 1993 scandal when the CIA worked with the Venezuelan military to send a ton of cocaine to the United States in a bid to infiltrate Colombian cartels. And this is something that Max and Aaron have been covering pretty in depth about how this cartel that they're accusing of being the big drug traders were propped up and actually founded on pretty much founded and put together by the CIA, as the New York Times said, as a way to kind of infiltrate the cartels in South America. So this last piece of tape I have here for you is General Douglas McGregor talking about the wisdom of attacking Venezuela and what he thinks that will get us. Listen closely.
Likely voters that have been polled have said, let's not go into Venezuela. In other words, they don't support the idea. So that tells us something. I think there are still a lot of Americans that were taken in by the argument against drug cartels. I run into people all the time that say, Doug, you've been a real staunch supporter for defending the border.
Which, as we can clearly see, is not real.
You want to go after these drug criminals here inside the United States. That's great. What's wrong with bombing Mexico? What's wrong with bombing Venezuela?
What's wrong with bombing
And I keep
Mexico?
trying to tell them that you're not going to accomplish much other than kill a lot of people that we'd rather.
That would be, if John McCain was still alive, that would be his campaign slogan. What, John McCain 2025, what's wrong with bombing Mexico?
Rather not kill, who are not necessarily our enemies. And then secondly, infuriating much of Latin America that is already not terribly enthusiastic about us at this point. And we really need to solve the problem here at home. This is where the appetite is. This is where the consumption occurs. So let's deal with it here. And, people still think there's something to be gained by attacking any country that is allegedly involved in drug and human trafficking that ends up in the United States. That's about the best that I can do. The people I served with in the military for many years, they're all over the place. They're up in Chicago. They're down in Atlanta, Georgia. And I think most of them, would like to get at the drug cartels whenever I talk to them. But I think they also realize that we have to start here at home. And I think that message is being delivered to the White House. There are a lot of people very frustrated with all the promises that the president made.
The biggest drug cartels in this country are advertising during fucking evening news.
Regarding our handling of the situation here in the United States, not just regarding the border, but immigration, criminality. And it hasn't really worked out. It hasn't happened.
Well, his tariffs have caused inflation and joblessness. These statistics are right there on the front page of the newspapers. But militarily.
So I want to stop there for just a second because I do think he's right. And this got me thinking about how foreign policy is domestic policy. So while I do think the Trump administration so far has failed dramatically on economic repair, fixing things for the working class, getting prices to go down. I mean, I see this at the store. Like, my shit has not gotten cheaper. I'm still spending way too much money on groceries. Things are way too expensive for the average person. And luckily for me, I don't have a massive budget. I can live pretty thin for the most part. But I will say that, that aside, given the forces you see pushing against Trump with this Ukrainian thing, I think there are similar forces at work with, for example, tariffs. These businesses that are against tariffs or have typically been able to game the system through certain legal, loopholes are not going to go along quietly with changes to that. They're going to do everything they can to enrage the public and get everything, pulled back to where it was, keep the status quo in place. That's what we need. That's what we want. So let me let McGregor here finish because he kind of nicely seals off this argument about Venezuela. And after that, we'll close out today's broadcast.
How unwise is it? 10,000 troops in Puerto Rico waiting to do what? To storm the beaches of Venezuela as if it were Vietnam?
Well, we have.
Much like in Ukraine, I believe that is a provocation attempt. You put these troops in the way of something where maybe one day a random person fires at them or there's gunfire exchange, and then all of a sudden you have a justification for something bigger. That's my personal take on this. But
I haven't seen the plans, all right? So we don't know what the operational plans are, but it looks as though, and it's about 17,000 troops in Puerto Rico, by the way.
Wow.
Lost track of how many thousands of Marines are floating offshore. But it looks as though the idea is that there would be some sort of internal coup. How this is going to be staged and executed is anybody's guess. But the idea is that you get Mrs. Machado installed, and then you seize things along the coast, which can easily be done by the Navy and the Marines. And then you bring in large numbers of Army infantry to operate as a quote unquote stabilization force. Now, we don't know what the underlying assumptions are, and these are very.
So I also wanted to say, you also have a push-pull here within the administration in Tulsi Gabbard. She's been suspiciously quiet. She did come out and say invading Venezuela is a bad idea. But since then, she's been very quiet. And I think, to me, that gives me a little bit of hope that maybe she's working behind the scenes to thwart this type of stuff. But who knows? But definitely an X factor here. As you look at the dynamic that's going on with Ukraine and the push and pull between different factions in the administration, you have to wonder, where's Tulsi?
Very dangerous. Your assumptions drive everything. And there have to be some assumptions that say there are enough people unhappy with Maduro that they will support the armed coup against Maduro. Who knows? I don't know what the numbers are. That's hard to buy into. But I do know something that has happened recently, and that is that the president has just announced that he wants to talk directly to Maduro. And it leads you to ask the question, all right, has somebody finally explained to the president that the border with Colombia is wide open? There are thousands of Colombian paramilitaries willing to come over. And even though they've had their differences with the Venezuelans, they would easily join in and fight with them against us. Is the president aware that the border with Brazil is a triple canopy jungle, almost impenetrable? There are only a couple of points where you can cross the border. And those border points are equally open. No one is going to stop anybody from coming in. So you could end up with 50 or 100,000 Brazilian paramilitaries that are willing to come in to make life miserable for us. Maybe some of that has.
I thought he said 50 to 100,000 bazillion, but he said Brazilian.
At home. And perhaps he recognizes this could be very, very costly at a point in time where as you've just pointed out, our financial system is fragile, our economy is weak, and maybe this is not a good idea. So what he's trying to do now, I think, is tell.
So quick comment there. This is why I call this faction, the Marco Rubio deep state faction of the Trump administration, the derp state, because look at what they're trying to do amidst the kind of dilapidated infrastructure we have here and the total, downtrodden society. No one is going to fight in these wars. I mean, you have military people that are bound by an oath. Even them, they're already telling people, hey, you can desert if you have qualms with what's going on. You're not going to see a bunch of Aaron Bushnells against Venezuela, I'm sure, but it's just a very dumb idea to ramp up any of these wars. And I also think that what he said about Trump talking to Maduro now, to me, given the kind of a guy Trump is, he does a lot of saber rattling and then he goes and talks to these people. So it could easily be that there are these troop kind of allocations, these kind of like buildups of troops on the coast of Venezuela and like in the region is a kind of like negotiation tactic to be like, look, dude, we have this much forces here. Let's talk. Like maybe it gives him some kind of leverage in an actual talk with Maduro. Either way, if you know me, I think the whole thing is a sham. And the idea that like Maduro is some hated leader in Venezuela is the type of propaganda the U.S. always pushes when they try to do these regime change wars and install a leader like Zelensky. And you see the dynamic that's occurring in Ukraine. And you know that a very similar dynamic would be occurring in Venezuela, which is why I think that they're ramping up these new potential conflicts, because they know, just like with Afghanistan, this one is dwindling down, but the money spigot is going to be turned off. How do we open a new spigot to launder money through? Venezuela.
Well, Maduro, look, instead of paying somebody $50 million to kill you or remove you, we'll give you $50 million if you will willingly give up your post and allow us to bring in Mrs. Machado and replace you with Machado. And if you do this, we'll grant you immunity. You'll never be tried in any courts of any law that we have influence over. You'll go live on some island somewhere in the Caribbean or the South Pacific or somewhere. You'll have all the money you need and all the women and all the happiness that you could possibly desire. Maybe that's what he's offering him on the assumption that he's going to sell his country out. Now, people that have spent time in Venezuela, and I know several of them now, have said, and these are some people who have been down there for as long as 9 years, everybody understands the corruption that is a part of life in Latin America. But when it comes to the country, anybody who sells out the country is dead meat as far as they're concerned.
Right.
And I don't think Maduro will accept that kind of deal, because as much as he might like to, he's not prepared to sell out his country and go down in history as the man that sold Venezuela to the United States for $50 million and immunity from prosecution.
That's the position that your boy Zelensky's in right now. People in his own country are looking at him like, yo, my brother died fighting Russia on the front lines and you're stealing money from the war effort. What the hell's going on? That would be the position Maduro would be in if he took that kind of a deal. I don't know that that's that's all hearsay from McGregor, but it's definitely a possibility.
Could evaporate overnight. He needs to understand that. Just because you can successfully bully members of your own party or even members of the other party for short periods of time doesn't mean that you can do it all the time. And if things turn against him, and they could, just think about it. How many aircraft carrying Marines ashore have to be shot down and Marines killed to wake everybody up to the dumb idea of intervention in Venezuela? And you see, there are people in the White House, I'm sure, who are saying, well, if that happens, we always have the rally round the flag effect. People will say, well, those evil Venezuelans, we got to teach them a lesson. I don't see that, Judge. I don't see Americans reacting that way. I see the opposite. I see Americans saying, what? What are you doing? Why? That's a dumb idea. And when those phones ring off the hook and the emails pour in and everybody's saying the same thing, suddenly whatever the president threatens you with doesn't mean a damn thing.
There you go. So that's pretty much all I've got for y'all today. I think that despite the crazy kind of whirlwind of things that are going on in a lot of these foreign policy, with a lot of these foreign policy kind of initiatives and like the Ukraine and Venezuela and Gaza, I think once that clears up, there will be a little bit more of a focus on what's going on here. But it's almost like you need to kind of silence some of those beasts before you can turn that focus here. And again, the dynamic is very clear. There's a lot of forces at work to prevent changes to the status quo. And, the reason Trump was elected is because he is one of the few people with kind of the gusto and the backing, frankly, the financial backing to take those forces on to some degree. Look at the intense backlash in the media from trying to do a peace deal with Russia. Like, they're back to calling everyone like Witkoff and anyone who's trying to foment peace a Russian spy. So take it for what it's worth. But the war is over, and one way or another, Ukraine is going to have to make some concessions. And when it comes to Venezuela, this diversion of resources and potential diversion of resources and saber rattling, I think a lot of it has to do with Rubio running the show. And as we're kind of seeing with this analogous thing in Ukraine, they're already keeping him out of peace talks because they know what he's up to. So with that, I'm somewhat optimistic still. I don't think that all hope is lost yet. And, we're going to see. Trump hasn't even been in office for a year yet. So it seems like a decade, I know. But let's close out with something fun today. I thought this was funny. I saw it this morning, and it's Ian Carroll talking about Kash Patel's girlfriend. So this is how it starts. Alexis Wilkins, this Thanksgiving, there are some people missing from the seats around our tables. We salute the work that's been done so far and look towards the future where we hope that no other family will have to endure this pain. And Ian says, next level comment section. So let's go into this comment section and just take a look at some of these comments. So here's this lady, totally not Mossad agent, pushing the fentanyl Mexican immigrant thing. Sucking the administration's wee-wee. Oh my God. So here we go. Honeypot, Kash Patel. Oh, that's a little extreme. You don't have to go to that level of name calling. A lot of honeypot comments. Harambe Floyd. People. We don't have a border with Afghanistan. Morons shouldn't be pretending to be journalists online. Yeah, so everyone's clearly buying. Anyway, it's not as good as I thought it was going to be. Everyone's clear. A lot of the people on the right, which I think are a lot of botted accounts, are buying the Afghanistan immigrant thing, which at the outset of this we talked about is a little deeper than just an extreme Muslim attacking the United States because they hate America. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, guys, unfortunately, for the bot armies. So let's close out today with something funny. What do I got for you today? Let's see here. Warp speed Trump juice. Oh, I got a couple good things. I'm going to play a couple things for you on the way out. Thank you all for tuning in today. This week was an interesting week. I didn't have a lot of good jokes or a lot of good bits to do this week, but I think it was, for me, a lot of the week was just catching up on where all these quote unquote peace negotiations are, specifically the Ukraine thing, because that whole thing just blew open with the corruption scandal. And then, of course, the shooting in DC, always a good thing to talk about. Gives me a lot of hope because you see people like Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson being a little bit more honest in these right-wing circles, and you kind of have a consensus among the left and the right, which are completely non-existent paradigms and should be rejected by everyone. So I'm going to take you out today with, speaking of left, some funny videos, a couple of them. And thank you for tuning in. As always, I got love for y'all. Hit me in the comments if I missed anything or I'm wrong about anything. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're new. And we'll see you out there. Peace. Democrats, it started with Bill Clinton. I'm sure you know this, but the party has completely gone corporate. And no amount of messaging is going to change that unless you start doing shit for your voters.
And what they're doing recently, which I uncovered in my story, is that they're running this influencer program. There's been all of this talk since the Democrats lost so spectacularly last fall about finding like the liberal Joe Rogan. They discovered the internet exists, and now they're trying to figure out what to do with it. And this is the strategy that they've come up with, is essentially funneling this dark money to influencers through Chorus, which is this content creator, liberal content creator kind of network.
I just want to pause there for a second and give you kind of my take on what is going on here. In the Obama era, and let's be honest, for 8 years, the Democrats kind of ran the shop, right? During that time, they built a media apparatus through the government that, I'm sure they thought was going to keep them in power forever. But the thing is, no one buys it anymore. No one buys any of the framing. No one buys any of it. And it's so easy to see through. David Pakman and Brian Tyler, I knew that they were getting money from, because they all repeat the same things. These people would not all be reading from the same script if they weren't being paid to. And that's how you know that they're fakes.
I think AOC and Bernie Sanders are having an affair. Like, people know this. Everyone knows. After their little events, they put on a little salsa on their trailer, and it moves around quite a bit.
Zoran Mamdani just said he thinks you guys are having an affair. What's your response to that?
No, let me jump in on this one. This is
what we're talking about.
So what if we like to put on a little salsa and get naked in our trailer? This is a big booty Latina. I'm not going to pass on a big booty Latina. What if Trump deports her tomorrow and all I have left is my ugly ass wife with no booty? I need my big booty Latina.
Researchers are coming to the conclusion that marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug in the United States, and we haven't begun to find out all of the ill effects, but they are permanent.
Brought it up. A real fun fact is the roast of Tom Brady was the most watched program in Netflix's entire history.
Holy shit.
Ever. Watched over 1.5 billion minutes.
Jesus Christ.
The episode of Kill Tony with Shane Gillis as Donald Trump.
Now Asians are hitting us with sticks. What's going on?
And Adam Ray as Joe Biden.
I should be in bed right now with a melatonin and a book.
Hilarious.
Beat that. 1.5 billion minutes watched to 2.5 billion minutes watched.
Wow.
It holds a YouTube record for retention rate. Wow. Anybody that watched it went back and started it where they stopped it the day before or watched it the whole way through. People watched it twice. People watched it 3 times. So the most watched comedy program of this year.
It might be the end of American bureaucracy.
Our bureaucracy really is in fundamental peril.
The foundations of American bureaucracy under attack.
They want to destroy our bureaucracy.
We are a bureaucracy in danger.
We're watching an election where people are on the ballot openly advocating the end of bureaucracy.
That's what Republicans are doing, attacking bureaucracy, attempting to destroy bureaucracy, and they're doing it with glee.
This is the end of bureaucracy in America.
When will America stop sleepwalking towards the end of bureaucracy?
Right. It's Democrats versus, as Bill Kristol says, the end of bureaucracy.
We are essentially, as Neil put it, one vote away from sort of the end of bureaucracy as we know it.
I think our bureaucracy and the stability of that bureaucracy is really the thing on the ballot and really so important.
accused by countless people. Donald Trump stood up and said this.
I'm going to stick up for him because nobody else is, but I don't believe it.
Trump angrily criticized the mother who accused Michael of child molestation.
And she goes after him viciously and violently, and I saw a story and I read another story about some of the things she's done, and I don't believe it.
While many were waiting for the superstar to be imprisoned, Trump firmly believed that the truth would prevail.
I had no idea he'd be that strong defensive of him. And good for Donald, you know.
It's tough to win, but I have a feeling he's going to win, Larry.
Many people avoided talking about the wrongful case from years before, but Trump unexpectedly brought it up again.
The kids were very young. Michael would come, play with the kids. He just loved children. He was not a child molester, and I am certain of that. He'd play with my son Eric and my son Donald, and he'd just play with them forever. He loved children, but he was not a child molester. And
even Trump's eldest son, when he grew up, mentioned Michael Jackson.
Jackson used to come up and, he was our neighbor at Trump Tower, right? So I was playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with Michael Jackson.
It's not appropriate for us to say who was behind the smear campaign against Michael, but Trump gave him the best support.
Michael Jackson. I love Michael Jackson. So
Michael was a great friend of ours, actually. And he lived in Trump Tower for a long period of time.